Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 426: Mysterious Island. When Gryffindor, one of the four great masters, appeared before Ralph, his first reaction wasn't the excitement he'd felt upon seeing Hufflepuff, but rather a sense of astonishment. Gryffindor was undeniably handsome, but his appearance bore a striking resemblance to a friend of Ralph's. While not as exaggerated as the 6 or 7/10 resemblance between Ravenclaw and Helena, subtle details in their features were quite similar, especially their ruby-like eyes and hair color. Yet, the two were separated by a full millennium. Gryffindor also turned his gaze to Ralph, staring at him for a moment before speaking. "You must be Ralph. When I returned to Hogwarts, Helga spoke of you with great pride, saying that all the students in my house combined weren't as good as you. I didn't believe it at first, but when I arrived in Nadia, I heard you infiltrated Legnark's vault and nearly killed him amidst a group of dragons. You're really quite impressive." Gryffindor lightly rubbed his chin with his thumb and forefinger, sizing up the boy, and joked, "A student as outstanding as you, how come you weren't sorted into Gryffindor? That doesn't make sense. What's the sorting hat doing?" After saying this, the man laughed heartily, strode over, patted the boy's shoulder, and picked up the sword again. The hilt was inlaid with jewels, gleaming brightly, the moonlight reflecting off the gleaming blade. Gryffindor flashed a dazzling sword flourish and exclaimed, "What a fine sword! When I found it, it was broken into several pieces, the blade badly damaged. I thought it was beyond repair, but Legnark told me that even a broken sword can be reforged." "Legnark intended to keep the sword for himself," Ralph said softly. "He even made a fake sword to deceive me. Gods can never control their greed, which is why the ancient wizards, after creating them, were dissatisfied and created us." Gryffindor pursed his lips and smiled slightly. "Don't worry, you two. I've already warned Legnark, and they won't cause any more trouble. However, Legnark will spread rumors that you stole his sword," Ralph warned. "This rumor will spread widely among the goblin community. In our time, goblins still believed it. Let them say what they want. Goblins are inherently hostile to wizards," Gryffindor said unconcerned. He put down his sword, sniffed, and said, "It smells delicious. I've been traveling all this way and I'm starving. Could I have some of your venison?" "Of course, we're already full, Professor," Cassandra said. "Well then, I won't stand on ceremony with you two little ones." Gryffindor sat by the campfire, a silver knife appearing in his hand. He cut a piece of leg meat from the deer, tasted it, and exclaimed how delicious it was. Then he laughed and said, "How can we have meat without wine?" Gryffindor took out a flat crystal flask from his waist. After opening the cap, a strong aroma of wine filled the air. He took a large gulp leisurely and said, "You two should try some too." Seeing Gryffindor's enthusiasm, Ralph couldn't refuse. He took the small flask, tilted his head back, and took a small sip. He felt a mellow taste on his tongue, and after swallowing it, his whole body felt comfortable. Ralph took another small sip before handing the flasks to the eager Cassandra. The girl also took a large gulp, her face instantly turning red. "Delicious, isn't it?" Gryffindor blinked and said, "On my way to Greece, I drank and drank, tasting no less than 100 kinds of wine, and this is still the best." Cassandra took another sip and quickly inquired, "Professor Gryffindor, where did you buy this wine?" "I didn't buy it," Gryffindor said rather proudly. "I got it from a mermaid tribe in the Mediterranean. Those mermaids are all master winemakers. They also raise a peculiar magical animal. If you put it into fresh brewing water, it will have the rich flavor of several years' storage in just a few days." "A wine bug?" Ralph asked. "Ralph, you actually know about the wine worms?" Gryffindor exclaimed in surprise. "I only found out about these magical creatures after visiting that mermaid tribe. A friend told me." Ralph smiled and replied. "Her name is Marcella, a golden two-tailed mermaid from the tribe you mentioned. You have a wide circle of friends." Gryffindor clicked his tongue. "The mermaids in that tribe are all stunning beauties. Your friend must be very pretty too, right?" Ralph hummed in agreement, then suddenly remembered something and inquired, I met Marcella when I was treating her. Professor, you know about grayscale, right? Yes. Gryffindor tore off a piece of venison, put it in his mouth, and slowly chewed and savored it. He said slowly, it's a bloodline curse, inherited only in the maternal line of the golden two-tailed mermaid family. Cassandra perked up her ears and asked curiously, what are the symptoms of this curse? All female mermaids will develop grayscale in one area of their body around the age of 15, and then it will start to spread outwards, Ralph explained. That's right, Gryffindor nodded. Infected skin hardens and cools, becoming like stone, eventually covering the entire body. I saw many such mermaids during my recent trip to the mermaid tribe. Their lives were worse than death. Ralph hesitated for a moment, then asked curiously, do you know the cause of this curse? I've consulted many ancient texts and records, and also consulted some long-lived magical creatures. I've done a lot of research. There's one theory. Gryffindor gently poked at the campfire, adding dry branches to the flames. The branches crackled and popped as they burned. There was an island guarded by the three sirens, the eldest of whom, Persepolis, fell in love with the ancient Greek wizard Odysseus. When Odysseus's ship left the island, Persepolis followed. Gryffindor, his eyes bright as he gazed at the flames, continued, the three sirens swore an oath to remain on the island forever, guarding a treasure. Persepolis broke her oath and was cursed for eternity. After Persepolis's death, the curse continued in her descendants, that is, grayscale. Ralph pondered for a moment, then pressed, where's that island? There are many records of it in human history, Gryffindor said softly. Homer's epics say that Odysseus encountered that island in the Strait of Messina, between Sicily and Italy. Ralph thought for a moment and said, so it's in the Mediterranean? No, Gryffindor shook his head. King Arthur was seriously wounded in the Battle of Camlan, and his sister Morgana took him to the island of Avalon for treatment. Avalon, also known as the Island of Blessing, is the island Odysseus encountered, but the location recorded in the Vita Merlin is southwest of Greenland. Ralph was somewhat taken aback. The Mediterranean Sea and Greenland are quite far apart. Wizards from other regions have also recorded its existence. Gryffindor continued. Norse wizards call it Valhalla, also known as the Hall of Heroes. Middle Eastern wizards call it Eden. East Asian classical records refer to it as Penglai, Fangsheng, and Yingzhou, where ancient emperors sent sorcerers to search for the elixir of immortality, and many others. Ralph stared blankly, finally asking, so, where exactly is that island? It has no fixed abode. Gryffindor's voice drifted. It drifts forever on the vast ocean. Occasionally, someone sets foot on it, and when they come down, it vanishes. No one knows where it will stop. Chapter 427 The Legendary Treasure Chest. Ralph listened quietly to Gryffindor's words, saying nothing, just staring blankly with his hands clasped in his hands. After a long while, he finally said, that island, what are those mermaids guarding? There are many things on the island, but the most precious, Gryffindor said solemnly, legend has it that it's a chest, a chest. Ralph's eyes widened. He recalled again the third illustration in Nicholas's Book of Abraham. In a room, there is a sealed chest, with a tree growing on it. There is also a wizard holding a sword, and behind him is a green dragon wearing a hat. Could it be this chest? The boy opened his mouth, but Gryffindor seemed to know what he wanted to ask and shook his head, saying, Ralph, I don't know what's in the box. Actually, I only heard about that box from others. Cassandra waited for a long time without hearing anything further, and asked curiously, who told you that? Rowena Ravenclaw. Gryffindor glanced at Cassandra and answered, she once went to that island alone. Gryffindor then stood up and slowly walked around the campfire, his expression dazed, and said, many years ago, Rowena was in the Atlantic Ocean, searching for the ruins of an ancient wizard, but she encountered a storm, and her ship sank to the bottom of the sea. Gryffindor put his hands behind his back, walked half a circle around the campfire, and continued, Rowena drifted on the sea for a long time, and happened to encounter a ship, a ghost ship. Rolf didn't speak. But he suddenly remembered the ghost ship he encountered when he traveled to America on the Mayflower during the summer vacation, and the coffin towed by the ship. Gryffindor didn't pause, his voice gentle. After Rowena entered that ghost ship, she drifted in the fog for a night. The ship finally docked at an island, that mysterious island. Come to think of it, that was 17 years ago. Hearing the word 17 years ago, Ralph's eyes flickered, and he pondered. I heard Professor Hufflepuff say that Professor Ravenclaw drank a spring of water before giving birth to Helena. Was it on that island that she drank it? That's right, Gryffindor nodded, slowing his pace, and said, "That island has many magical springs, one of which, when drunk, can give birth to life, even a virgin. There's such water." Cassandra's face was filled with astonishment. "Don't be surprised, there are many historical records of virgins conceiving." Gryffindor stopped, stood with his hands behind his back, and said in a deep voice, "The most famous is Mary. She actually drank from that spring and became pregnant out of wedlock, giving birth to Jesus. Actually, I've always wanted to try." Gryffindor blinked and laughed, "to see if I could also have a child blessed by heaven." "I'm just kidding." Gryffindor laughed and said, "Anyway, that island is magical. I've always wanted to go there, but I can't find its location." Ralph thought for a moment and then asked, "You went to the tribe of the two-tailed mermaids to find out where that island is?" "Not entirely." Gryffindor nodded and then shook his head. "If those mermaids could find the island, they would have gone there themselves. Their information is limited, but..." Gryffindor paused. "When Persepolis chased Odysseus and left that island, she took something with her. I'm mainly going to find that thing." Ralph lowered his eyelids and murmured, "The key." Gryffindor was genuinely shocked this time. He looked at the boy hesitantly. This was information he had gathered after years of investigation. He frowned and said, "Rolf, you even know this." "I heard it from Maricela. She said that 1,000 years ago, you took something from their tribe." Rolf explained calmly. "Later, I asked the Sorting Hat, and it told me it was a key, and that the key was at Hogwarts, placed there by you in a place marked by a mermaid." "Is that so?" Gryffindor paced slowly again, tapping his other hand with his wand, and said after some thought, "Actually, I only took a map. We haven't found the key yet, and we're not even sure if the map is real. But the news you brought about from the future proves that the map is real." "Haha." Gryffindor was somewhat excited. He laughed loudly. "When I find the key, I'll hide it in the place marked by the mermaid, just as you said." Ralph was immediately stunned. "So Gryffindor placed the key in the place marked by the mermaid, because of him?" The boy stretched out his hands and rubbed his cheeks. His return seemed to have inadvertently contributed to many historical events. "By the way, Professor Gryffindor, is there any way to cure grayscale?" Ralph asked Maricela. "Yes, but it's just a guess." Gryffindor nodded. "I heard from Rowena that there's a spring on that island called the Fountain of Good Fortune. Around the Fountain of Good Fortune grow many herbs, enough to cure all curses and diseases." Ralph was momentarily stunned. Noticing the change in the boy's expression, Gryffindor asked, "Rolf, what's wrong? Did you remember something important again?" Rolf hummed in response, puzzled. "In my time, I did hear of an island containing the Fountain of Good Fortune, but its location was fixed, in the North Sea." "The North Sea?" "Yes, that island is in the North Sea," Rolf said solemnly. "Instead of wandering the world without a fixed abode, as you said." "That's strange," Gryffindor pondered, filled with suspicion. He asked curiously, "Have you been there?" "No, but I have a map here." Rolf took out a small purse, which had been enlarged considerably using a stretch without a trace charm, and contained many items. He quickly pulled out an ancient parchment nautical map, on which were drawn various exquisitely detailed and terrifying magical sea creatures, seemingly about to roar out of the map. Gryffindor took the map, examined it, and frowned. "Rover, where did you get this map?" "It's from another ghost ship," Rover explained. "The captain got the map from another ghost ship when he was young, then bought a ship and went to find the Fountain of Good Fortune. When it reappeared, only the ghost ship and the map remained. The captain and crew had vanished." "I see." Gryffindor stared at the map, pondering for a long time, then said, "It seems I need to go to the North Sea. Rover, will you come with me?" "No." Rover shook his head. "The owner of that ghost ship knew a friend of mine, and that friend warned me not to try to find these things, because believing in them would lead to death. He said those ships became ghost ships because they tried to find the Fountain of Good Fortune and were cursed." "The curse of death?" "Professor Gryffindor, I'm a coward. No wonder you didn't get into my house." "It's because you lack courage." Gryffindor laughed heartily, radiating swagger, and grinned. "If only death truly existed, I could try to kill him with a sword." Ralph smiled without saying a word. "You obtained the Stone of Destiny? Are you planning to return 1,000 years in the future?" Gryffindor asked again. "Yes," Ralph nodded, gazing at the campfire, his mind filled with thoughts of Helena, whom he had unexpectedly missed. Before returning, he still had to go to the Albanian forest, to retrieve her body. Chapter 428 Helena and Barrow. No matter how much Gryffindor tried to persuade him, Ralph firmly refused to go with him to the North Sea to explore the mysterious island. Gryffindor, powerful and unconcerned about danger, was different. Ralph simply wanted to go home, not embark on an adventure with the four great masters 1,000 years ago. He needed to be cautious, he couldn't afford to be reckless. So, upon returning to Hogwarts, Ralph immediately gave the Stone of Destiny to Hufflepuff, asking her to brew the elixir of youth. Standing in a large classroom, Ralph looked at the 10 cauldrons and asked curiously, "Professor Hufflepuff, who are you brewing all this elixir of youth for?" Hufflepuff waved her wand, and 10 magical ingredients flew into the cauldrons. She turned and said, "For you, of course, for me." Ralph was astonished. He peered into the cauldrons. Their enormous capacity could hold at least 50 liters of water, and 10 cauldrons meant 500 liters. He'd be drinking it forever. The elixir of youth also has its effects. You don't think that just one sip will make you eternally young? Hufflepuff patted the cauldron and laughed. You're aiming to stay young for 1,000 years, so of course you'll need to drink a lot at once. Ralph swallowed hard. He remembered Nicolo's elixir of immortality from the Philosopher's Stone, which also required continuous consumption, but this was far too much. Don't complain about having too much. Hufflepuff picked up the Stone of Destiny and patted it lightly, like smashing a watermelon. You should be glad this stone is big enough. A crucible of elixir of youth can only keep you young for 100 years, but it requires a Stone of Destiny the size of half a fist. If this stone were any smaller, it might not even be enough for you. Then please be careful when brewing it, Ralph hurriedly said. Don't fail and waste my Stone of Destiny. I won't stand for it. Oh dear, so you're already trying to take advantage of me, Hufflepuff chuckled. Don't forget, you still owe me a huge debt, with interest. How could I take advantage of you? Ralph chuckled sheepishly. By the way, how many days will it take to brew? At least half a month. Hufflepuff picked up a knife and chopped the Stone of Destiny into pieces. What, do you have other things to do? Ralph nodded. I need to go to Albania. Hufflepuff didn't ask the boy's purpose, but only inquired with concern. How are you going to get there? It's not like the Kingdom of Nadia. It's not a journey that can be completed in just a few days. I'm thinking about it too, Ralph said, looking at Hufflepuff for help. Albania was in the Balkans, a vast distance from Hogwarts. There were no Orient Express trains in this era, and Ralph couldn't apparel it. A round trip could take several months. By the time he reached the Albanian forest, Helena's body would either have been eaten by wild animals or probably already rotting. Hufflepuff thought for a moment and suggested, you could borrow Godric's portkey. He traveled to Greece recently and set up many portkeys along the way for future travel. He should have left a portkey when he passed through Albania as well. Okay, I'll go find Professor Gryffindor now. Ralph thanked her and hurriedly turned and ran off. Hufflepuff smiled slightly and continued brewing potions for the boy. Albania, deep in the forest. Helena, who had fallen asleep some time earlier, suddenly awoke with a start. She sat up, shook her head, and touched her tear-streaked eyes. She had just had a dream in which she wore her mother's crown, but the crown suddenly tightened and she couldn't take it off. She begged her mother to save her, but was questioned about why she had stolen the crown. Thank goodness it was just a dream, but this nightmare was too strange and eerie. Helena's hands and feet were ice cold. She stood up, walked out of the newly built cabin, and looked into the distance. She had been living here for 2 days, but she still wasn't used to the environment. Trees all around, vast and intertwined, casting thousands upon thousands of dark green shadows, the wind rustling the leaves. To Helena's ears, those sounds were like weeping. Helena wanted to cry now. She missed the warm Ravenclaw common room, the delicious food of Hufflepuff, the dry jokes of Gryffindor, the hot springs she used to soak in. She wanted to go back to Hogwarts. But Helena wouldn't go back. She wanted to become smarter, as smart as her mother. She didn't want to be secretly mocked by the other students as a silly beauty. Helena stood there for a long time. As the sun disappeared behind the jagged mountains, shadows crept into the forest, and darkness enveloped her. For some reason, a sudden unease gripped her heart. So, Helena curled up, hugging herself tightly to her chest. She closed her eyes, tried to sleep a little longer, and tried not to think about Hogwarts. Then, she heard a sound. Helena immediately opened her eyes, picked up her wand, held her breath, and listened carefully. She heard the rustling of leaves against each other, the whistling of the wind, but what caught her attention was something else. Footsteps. Someone was coming this way. Helena's hair stood on end. She was deep in the Albanian forest, a place where there was usually no one. Could it be her mother coming to find her? Helena saw a figure emerge from the woods. She grabbed the crown, turned, and ran into the depths of the forest. The wizard stopped, pulled back his hood, revealing Ralph's handsome face. He stared blankly at Helena's retreating figure, wondering if he had arrived too early. Where was Barrow? Helena didn't see who it was, but ran as fast as she could through the dark woods. Tree roots gripped her feet, and dry branches whipped her face, leaving thin, scarlet streaks of blood on her cheeks. Oblivious, she stumbled forward. But the ground had rained the night before, making it damp and muddy, and she slipped and fell, the crown flying far from her hand. Helena gritted her teeth in frustration, hooked onto a tree root, and managed to stand up. Then, limping forward, she picked up the crown. She decided to stop running away. Looking around, she spotted a hollow tree with gnarled roots and a thick layer of moss. Helena thought for a moment, then hid her crown inside, stuffing in several leaves for concealment. After doing this, Helena suddenly heard a rustling of leaves. She immediately turned around and froze. This time, she finally saw the person's face clearly. Barrow smiled, holding a gleaming short sword. His eyes glowed red, and he said in a hoarse voice, "It's me, Helena. I'm here on Professor Ravenclaw's orders, to take you back, thanks to just love wandering the water for the donation." Chapter 429 Slytherin's Plot. Helena had expected many people to come looking for her, but she never anticipated that Barrow would be the first to appear. She stared at the emaciated man before her, her pale blue eyes filled with disbelief. "My mother sent you to find me? Impossible. You're lying. How could she possibly send you? If Professor Ravenclaw hadn't told me your location, how would I have known you were hiding in the Albanian forest?" Barrow approached, wearing a simple brown robe. His gaunt face appeared even more menacing in the moonlight. "Professor Ravenclaw is ill," Barrow said in a hoarse voice. "Helena, come back with me, my mother is ill." Helena's heart clenched. Her face filled with worry. "What illness? I don't know, but it's serious," Barrow said hoarsely. "Professor Ravenclaw desperately wants to see you, so he sent me to find you." "Helena, go back, and take the tiara you took. Where did you put it?" Hearing the word tiara, Helena suddenly calmed down. She questioned, "Where is Professor Hufflepuff? Her healing arts are superb, she can cure any illness." "You'll find out when you get back," Barrow said impatiently, his voice rough and harsh, like steel scraping against rock. "Let's go quickly, take your crown." Helena stepped back, her voice fierce. "I won't go with you, no, you have to come with me, you must come with me," Barrow roared, "as long as I bring you and the crown back. As a reward, the professor will marry you to me." Helena was stunned speechless for several seconds. She knew Barrow had always liked her, ever since they entered Hogwarts, but she had never liked him. "Dream on. My mother will not let me marry you." "I will not agree either, you'd better give up." "Why?" Barrow's face darkened with anger. He questioned, "Helena, I like you so much, I came all the way from Hogwarts to find you, why do you always reject me?" Helena looked at Barrow with disgust, then quickly looked away, as if even a second glance would make her nauseous. "You're too ugly. I'd rather die than marry you. Can you please stop bothering me?" Helena's disgusted gaze and cold expression instantly enraged Barrow. His face darkened as he said, "Come with me. I want you to come with me." Helena could feel Barrow's anger, she could see it in his expression, his twisted, taut lips, and the way he looked at her. "Barrow, stay away from me, you're scaring me, nothing can scare you." Look at me, Barrow grew increasingly agitated. His face was flushed, veins bulged on his neck, and his eyes were bloodshot. He reached out to grab Helena, but she dodged him. Barrow's face was contorted, his eyes bloodshot, and he had completely lost his mind. Suddenly, he raised the dagger in his hand and plunged it into Helena's chest. Helena stared at Barrow in disbelief. She felt blood flowing from her chest, dripping onto her arm, and she trembled uncontrollably, but her last bit of strength left her. Helena collapsed to the ground. Barrow, who had just been acting like a madman, instantly snapped back to reality. His eyes widened, frighteningly white, and filled with terror. "Helena, I didn't mean to," Barrow stammered, his voice a terrified murmur. He knelt, trembling like a withered leaf in a storm. "I didn't mean to. I was tricked. Helena, I didn't mean to kill you. Teacher, why did you lie to me? You didn't mean to. Or was it unintentional?" A strange voice suddenly rang in Barrow's ears. He turned and saw a strange boy sitting in a tree not far away. In his hand, he held the Ravenclaw crown. Barrow stared intently at the boy, slowly saying, "Who are you? What are you doing here? And how did the crown end up in your hands?" "Who I am, you'll find out later." Ralph leaned against the tree trunk, crossed his legs, and squinted at Barrow, saying, "Why am I here? Helena told me she was here. As for the crown, Helena hid it in a tree hollow. I just found it. Alright, as a fair exchange, you should answer my questions now." Ralph jumped down from the tree and walked towards Barrow, asking, "You just said your teacher lied to you. Which teacher? How did they lie to you?" Barrow suddenly reached for his wand at his waist, but Ralph was already there, twisting his wrist. Vines burst from the ground, tilting upwards, wrapping around Barrow's ankle, instantly tripping him to the ground. The boy waved his wand, saying, "Expelliarmus." The wand landed in Ralph's hand, and Barrow's body flew backward like a bowstring stretched to its limit. He was caught by vines, which slammed him to the ground, his body sliding a short distance and leaving a trail in the earth. Ralph strode forward, walked to Barrow's side, and stomped on the back of his head, increasing the pressure. Perhaps because his skull was more resilient than mud, his head slowly sank into the ground. The boy lifted his foot and stomped down again, causing Barrow to cough up a mouthful of blood, leaving a gruesome pool of red on the ground. "Professor Ravenclaw didn't send you?" I asked her. "Who sent you?" Ralph looked at the silent Barrow and sneered. "You won't talk, huh? No problem, I have truth potion." Ralph grabbed Barrow's hair, pulled out a small bottle, and fed him the potion. "Tell me, who sent you to find Helena?" When Barrow opened his eyes, his gaze was vacant. "My teacher. Salazar Slytherin." "Slytherin?" Ralph heard a name that surprised him, and his expression gradually turned serious. "Why did he send you here?" "My teacher said Helena was hiding here. If I find the diadem and destroy it, he can make Helena fall in love with me." "Destroy the diadem?" Ralph was somewhat doubtful and asked, "Then why do you say he lied to you?" "I have bipolar disorder, and I lose control when I'm angry," Barrow replied. "My teacher gave me a potion, saying it could help suppress my bipolar disorder, and sent me to find Helena. But he lied to me." "Where did Slytherin go?" "My teacher went to the southwest corner of the Albanian forest. He went to intercept Ravenclaw." Barrow took a deep breath, trembling, and then said in a flat, emotionless tone, "My teacher wants to kill Ravenclaw." Ralph was completely stunned. He remained silent for a long time, then raised his wand, pointed it at Barrow, and said, "Forget everything." Chapter 430 The Death of Ravenclaw. Barrow groggily awoke, a sharp pain shooting through the back of his head, as if someone had stomped on it. He cautiously raised his arm, gently touching his scalp, racking his brains to recall how he'd gotten the injury. Turning his head, he caught sight of Helena not far away. The memory finally began to form again. Barrow remembered his manic episode. He'd killed Helena and injured his own head. "Helena! I didn't want to kill you," Barrow cried out in agony, crouching on the ground, his fingers gripping his scalp, a mixture of laughter and tears, a maniacal expression. Suddenly, Barrow grabbed the dagger he'd used to kill Helena and plunged it into his own stomach. He collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing, bright red blood gushing from his chest. Ralph's figure slowly materialized, his expression complex as he looked at Barrow. He hadn't expected this man to actually commit suicide. He'd been prepared to at least preserve Barrow's dignity if he didn't. Of course, Rove felt no sympathy for Barrow, nor any emotion for his so-called love. Killing someone for unrequited love is terrifying. Rove kicked Barrow's corpse away from Helena, then knelt down to examine Helena's body. Helena's body was still warm, but her heart had stopped beating. She was completely dead. When Rove saw Barrow kill Helena, he almost couldn't resist saving her. But he couldn't. If Helena had survived, Cassandra's prophecy would have come true, but history would have been completely altered. In the grand scheme of history, it might have been just a small stone thrown upstream, but the resulting ripples would have a huge impact on the future downstream. People and events that might have appeared in the future could have disappeared, and many things that wouldn't have appeared might have appeared. After all, the power of the butterfly effect is terrifying. Rove didn't want to use the time turner to travel back 1,000 years only to find that Sherry, Hermione, and even Dumbledore had vanished. This is also why Ralph didn't want to stay here any longer and wanted to return to his own time as soon as possible. The longer he stayed, the greater the butterfly effect would be. As Dumbledore said, those who play with time will inevitably be devoured by it. Rolf didn't want to end up like Peter. Of course, although he couldn't save Helena at this moment, it didn't mean he couldn't do something. For example, the corpse in front of him. Rolf helped Helena up and gently removed her light blue silk robe, revealing her breasts, as delicate as peeled lychee flesh. Between the undulating peaks, there was a black wound, a stab wound from a short sword. "Helena, I did this to save you, please don't mind," Rolf said softly. "Anyway, you've shown me many times in the future. And, blame Barrow for stabbing so cunningly." After silently repeating this a few times, Rolf placed his palm on Helena's bulging wound and gently stroked it. Healing hand. This magic, from a unicorn, accelerates wound healing when touched with care. The black wound, under Ralph's touch, indeed healed visibly, disappearing without a trace. Ralph then helped Helena dress again, and with a wave of his wand, placed her in a body bag. He planned to take Helena back to Hogwarts to see if Professor Hufflepuff had any way to preserve the fresh body until 1,000 years later. Ralph didn't know if this would be useful for resurrecting Helena later. He could only do his best and leave the rest to fate. Ralph then picked up the fake crown he had prepared and threw it into the hollow tree. It would likely become Tom's Horcrux. After doing all this, Ralph didn't leave immediately but stood there, pondering what Barrow had said. Slytherin was planning to kill Ravenclaw. According to the history of magic, Ravenclaw died of illness, which was also what Barrow had told Helena. But Helena had also told Ralph that she had heard another version of the story. Ravenclaw was killed in battle by other wizards. Could this rumor be true, and the murderer be Slytherin? Ralph hesitated, his mind filled with the image of Ravenclaw talking to him by the death well and gently stroking his forehead. The boy wavered, but finally decided to go check out the southwest corner of the forest that Barrow had mentioned. Ralph packed his things, took off, used his wand to determine the direction, and flew quickly into the distance. He flew for about an hour, wondering if he had gone the wrong way, when suddenly he felt a violent earthquake. Ralph soared into the sky, looking into the distance with unobstructed vision. He possessed the dynamic vision of a hippogriff, allowing him to see very far. 100 miles away, dust billowed, and a gigantic magical creature, its outline blurred, roared as if suffering immense pain. Countless birds of the forest took flight. In an instant, countless bolts of lightning struck from the sky, obliterating the creature. Looking up, Rolf saw a vast sea of clouds churning. At that moment, not only him, but all the muggles and wizards of the Balkans involuntarily looked up at the sky. The endless sea of clouds rolled and slowly descended. It was as if the heavens had fallen to earth. Fleeting flashes of lightning constantly seeped from the bottom of the clouds, forcing Rolf to lower his altitude for fear of being struck. In the distance, a golden light suddenly rose from the ground, leaving an extremely long, slender streak that illuminated the entire Balkans as if it were daytime. Rolf's eyes were blinded by the light, and it took him a long time to adjust. When he looked up again, the sky was cloudless, with only a vast, boundless expanse of ripples spreading outwards. Ralph was like a fish swimming at the bottom of a lake, gazing up at the mirror-like surface of the rippling water. Soon, two more figures landed simultaneously with a thud, like two meteorites crashing into the earth. The earth trembled violently. Ralph was stunned. Was this the battle between Ravenclaw and Slytherin? The tremors were felt even from 100 kilometers away. But after this tremor, the entire world fell silent, as if the battle was over. Ralph's face paled, and he immediately flew away into the distance. After a long while, he landed at the edge of a giant crater. Here, all traces of trees and life had vanished, leaving only a huge, circular crater that changed color from white to gray, then to black, and finally to red. The diameter of this crater was far greater than the area created by Voldemort's self-destruction. Ralph took off again, finally landing in the center. He searched for a long time and finally found that familiar figure. Rowena Ravenclaw. She lay quietly on the ground. Like Helena Ravenclaw, dead, thanks to little evil spirit of Babel for the donation. Chapter 431 The Sealed Corpse. Overnight, two Ravenclaws died one after another, and this ancient surname vanished from the annals of history. As the sole witness, Ralph was speechless. He had come to collect Helena's body, but unexpectedly ended up collecting the bodies of both the Ravenclaw mother and daughter. What a mess. To Ralph, Ravenclaw and Helena were essentially ancient beings who had died 1,000 years ago. Knowing they would die, he shouldn't have felt much emotional turmoil. But now, witnessing their death firsthand, especially Ravenclaw's demise, a strange sense of unease welled up within Ralph. That was Rowena Ravenclaw. One of the 4 leaders. How could she just die like that? Ralph collected Ravenclaw and Helena's bodies, kept watch in the cabin all night, and the next morning, he rushed to the location of the portkey and returned to Hogwarts. In the office, after listening to Ralph's account, Hufflepuff remained silent for a long time, staring blankly at the 2 corpses. Ralph sat there, lost in thought. After a long pause, Hufflepuff finally asked softly, "Ralph, who do you think did it?" "I gave Barrow the truth potion, and he said it was Slytherin," Ralph said cautiously. "But I didn't actually see Slytherin. If you had seen Salazar, you wouldn't be back alive," Hufflepuff sighed softly. In this wizarding world, there are only a handful of wizards who could defeat Rowena, and besides Salazar, probably no one else could have killed her. "But I don't understand, Professor," Ralph asked, puzzled. "Why would Slytherin do this?" Hufflepuff didn't answer directly. Looking at the boy's still somewhat childish face, she asked instead, "Do you know why Slytherin left Hogwarts back then?" Magical history says that the 4 founders had disagreements on their educational philosophies. Ralph thought for a moment and replied. Slytherin wanted Hogwarts to be more selective in its admissions. He believed magical education should be limited to pure-blood families. "If we're really going to part ways over something so trivial, then you're seriously underestimating us," Hufflepuff said with a complex expression. "After the ancient wizarding kingdoms perished, we inherited the title of wizards. Those early pure-blood wizards wanted to establish a new kingdom. That kingdom was quickly destroyed due to a curse, but the ideas of wizard supremacy and wizard-founded kingdoms have been passed down from generation to generation. Salazar Slytherin was a typical wizard-founded nation-builder," Hufflepuff said, gazing into the distance with a dazed look. He wanted to recreate the brilliance of the ancient wizarding civilization, to let wizards rule the world, to become the supreme masters. Whether muggles, goblins, or giants, all creatures would have to bow down and obey, no longer daring to run rampant. Salazar told us that he had found a way to break the curse of failed wizard-founded kingdoms and wanted us all to help him, but the lesson of the ancient wizarding kingdom's destruction is still fresh in our minds. Those powerful beings, who once ruled the world, ultimately became nothing more than a pile of limbs and remains in the mud. That's why we all opposed Salazar. He eventually left in anger, completely parting ways with us, leading to a complete break." Ralph thought for a moment, then asked curiously, "Professor, how does Slytherin plan to break the curse?" "Ralph, do you remember asking me? Were those ancient wizards really all dead?" Hufflepuff asked. The boy nodded. "After the cataclysmic disaster, some ancient wizards survived. To avoid being enslaved by them again, our ancestors united with giants, goblins, centaurs, and other intelligent beings to form an allied army and fight against those ancient wizards." Hufflepuff placed his hands on his stomach, his face grave. "That war was incredibly brutal. We lost too many allied soldiers, but among the surviving ancient wizards, only one wizard survived. That wizard seemed immortal. No matter how the allied army attacked, they couldn't kill him." Hufflepuff's voice was low. "Finally, the allied army used methods that you and I can't even imagine today to cut that ancient wizard into 5 parts. These were the sealed right leg, the sealed left leg, the sealed right arm, the sealed left arm, and the sealed torso. They were hidden away by 5 pure-blood wizards and imprisoned for tens of thousands of years." Ralph felt as if he were listening to gibberish, his eyes glazed over. Hufflepuff continued, "Salazar's solution was to restore the ancient wizard's body, obtaining the right arm passed down through his family, while the left arm was in Rowena's possession." Ralph slowly processed this information, speculating, could it be that Slytherin attacked Professor Ravenclaw to obtain the sealed left arm? Possibly, Hufflepuff sighed. However, Rowena, through the Well of Death, already knew her destiny, and she might have made preparations beforehand. Hufflepuff stood up and paced around the office, saying, "Ralph also built her own grave a long time ago. After the funeral, I will place her and Helena's bodies there, Ravenclaw's grave." Ralph's thoughts drifted slightly. He thought of Helena. In the future, she had repeatedly suggested that he rob this grave. "Ralph, in your time, Rowena's grave wasn't damaged or robbed, was it?" Hufflepuff suddenly asked. Ralph snapped out of his daze, cleared his throat, and said, "No, how could anyone possibly rob Professor Ravenclaw's grave? I'd be the first to object." "That's good." Hufflepuff gave the boy a deep look, then said, "By the way, Ralph, Before Rowena left Hogwarts, she told me, she left her Chamber of Secrets and the Well of the Dead to you, left to me." Ralph was stunned. "Yes," Hufflepuff patted the boy's shoulder and said, "but she's locked the door. You can only get in if you find the key." "The key?" Ralph asked. "Where's it?" "Rowena didn't tell me." Hufflepuff shook his head and said, "She hid it in a very secluded spot in Hogwarts. You'll have to find it yourself." The boy fell silent. Without any hints, where was he supposed to find it? Ralph chatted with Hufflepuff for a while longer before finally leaving the office, and the room fell silent again. Hufflepuff stood beside Ravenclaw, staring blankly at his friend. Her thoughts drifted back to that year, when the four of them, sharing the same ideals and aspirations, joined hands to establish Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Time had passed, things had changed, and the past seemed like a dream. When Gryffindor returned, he would surely hunt down Slytherin. The four of them would likely never be seen again. A wave of sadness washed over Hufflepuff. She sighed softly, and tears welled up in her deep, unfathomable eyes. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432 The Death of Professor Binns. Ralph left his office and walked down the corridor toward the Ravenclaw common room. He intended to find Cassandra to have her divine the location of the Ravenclaw key, but after a few steps, he stopped. Ralph suddenly remembered Professor Binns. Professor Binns had told Helena that her mother had been killed by other wizards in a battle. Ralph had asked about this in class before, and Professor Binns had said that a student had told him, but it had been so long that he couldn't remember who it was. Ralph hadn't pursued the matter then. After all, whichever student it was, they had been dead for 1,000 years, their bones reduced to dust, and there was no need to delve into it. But now it was different. Ralph was 1,000 years in the past, and he could investigate this matter to see if the student who had told Professor Binns the message was connected to Slytherin. Thinking this, the young man immediately turned around and hurried toward the faculty common room. When he reached the door, he looked inside. Only Professor Binns was in the room, sitting in a soft chair by the fireplace, his head bowed and his eyes closed. Ralph knocked gently on the door. Seeing that Professor Binns did not move and seemed to be asleep, he was about to turn and leave when Professor Binns suddenly opened his eyes. The old man looked up, his cloudy eyes meeting the boy's at the door, and said in a hoarse voice, "Scatty, is something the matter, Professor Binns? I'm sorry to have woken you." "I'd like to ask you some questions," Rove said apologetically. "I wonder if this is a convenient time for you." Professor Binns shifted his frail body in his seat and nodded. "Yes, come in." Rove entered the room. He hesitated for a moment, then said with concern, "Professor, my matter isn't too urgent. I saw you just fell asleep. Perhaps I could help you back to your office to rest for a while." "No need." Professor Binns rubbed his eyes and replied, "I was just taking a nap. The older I get, the more like this happens. If I go back to bed, I won't be able to sleep." Professor Binns was indeed very old. His skin was as thin as parchment, a few strands of white hair hung on either side of his bald forehead, wrinkles lined the corners of his eyes, and his chin was sagging. Rove walked to the fireplace, picked up the teapot, and poured a cup of tea for himself and Professor Binns respectively. Binns shifted his position, took the thin, smooth porcelain cup, slowly sipped his tea, and said, "Scatty, what brings you here?" "Professor Salazar Slytherin. Do you remember him?" "Slytherin? Of course I remember." Professor Binns's face showed disgust, and he snorted coldly, "Child, what I'm about to say might upset you. Slytherin was a grumpy, sharp-tongued, and arrogant fellow. He always looked down on Muggle-born students and refused to teach them magic. Slytherin later apparently tried to ask Professor Ravenclaw for something, but was refused. Gryffindor fought with him, and then he left the school. If you ask me, it's good that Slytherin left. They should never come back." The old man complained about Slytherin's past, but there were hardly any good words. In Ralph's mind, a self-portrait of Slytherin quickly surfaced, a combination of Snape and Voldemort. "Oh, Scatty, you didn't come here to listen to me ramble on about Slytherin's terrible history," Professor Binns said in his aged voice. "Please forgive this old man's rambling. So, what do you want to know?" "I want to know," Ralph politely sipped his tea, "are there any students in this school who are close to Slytherin?" Professor Binns thought for a moment and said, Barrow in 7th year, but I haven't seen him lately. Besides him, there is another student, Ralph quickly pressed. Who is it? Professor Binns stared at Ralph with his pale eyes and said, You, me. Ralph was completely taken aback. Yes, Professor Binns nodded. I heard the students say you speak parsley. You must be related to Slytherin by blood. Aren't you his son? Just then, a deafening bell suddenly rang out, its deep, resonant sound filling the room with a mournful, elegiac tone. This is the assembly bell, summoning all teachers and students to the Great Hall immediately. Professor Binns narrowed his eyes suspiciously. It only rings when something major happens. What's wrong? Ralph didn't speak, fearing that the sudden news of Ravenclaw's death would be too much for Professor Binns to bear. But the old man had already risen shakily, his back hunched, and walked to the door, hearing the commotion outside. Someone shouted, Quick, to the Great Hall. Professor Ravenclaw is dead. Students rushed towards the Great Hall, some weeping, some staggering, their pale faces etched with fear and grief. Professor Binns came out of the room, stopped a student by the collar, and asked, Who has died? Professor Ravenclaw is dead, the student sobbed. Professor Binns, Professor Ravenclaw's body is in the Great Hall. Professor Hufflepuff said she died of a serious illness. After the students ran away, the old man, his back hunched, returned to the room, his face pale, and murmured, Serious illness? I saw Professor Ravenclaw just a few days ago. Where did this serious illness come from? There must be something fishy about this. Professor Binns suddenly looked at Ralph and said, Scatty, I've never seen you before. And not long after you appeared, Professor Ravenclaw died. Professor, you don't think I did it, do you? Ralph was speechless. But you speak parsley, you must be connected to Slytherin. Was this done by Slytherin? It must have been Slytherin. He killed Professor Ravenclaw. Professor Binns became more and more convinced of his idea. He felt a little dizzy, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed a chair and gasped, Scatty, take me to the Great Hall. Scatty. Scatty. Just as Ralph was about to help Professor Binns up, the old man's face flushed crimson, and he suddenly slumped into his chair. Ralph was terrified and quickly released his Patronus to notify Hufflepuff, then began performing CPR on Professor Binns. He racked his brains for the methods and steps of heart attack resuscitation, placing his palm on the center of Binns' chest, pressing down vertically with his other hand. But Professor Binns' heart had already stopped beating. A few minutes later, a pearly white, semi-transparent ghost suddenly appeared. The ghost Binns stared intently at Ralph, seemingly trying to memorize the boy's appearance, making a hoarse sound, Scatty, Scatty. Thanks to Lonely Snow A745 and book friend 20220902141219636 inches for their generous donations. Chapter 433 Farewell. For someone to remember another person 1,000 years after death, it must be either a profound and unwavering love or a deep-seated hatred. Ralph thought to himself, he and Professor Binns were neither of those extremes, but he must have done something else out of line to ensure Professor Binns remembered Scatty for a lifetime. Ralph had imagined many scenarios, but he never considered that Professor Binns becoming a ghost would be related to him. No wonder he could remember for 1,000 years. But logically, Ralph couldn't be entirely blamed. Professor Binns clearly couldn't accept the news of Ravenclaw's death, which caused his heart attack. And this news wasn't given by Ralph. He simply happened to be there, in a place he shouldn't have been, nothing more. Of course, what left Ralph speechless was that the student who reminded Professor Binns that Ravenclaw was murdered, not died of illness, was himself. Professor Binns would tell Helena this message, and 1,000 years later, Helena would tell Ralph, who would then travel back 1,000 years and tell Professor Binns, he was still the source of all evil. The most heartbroken were the Hogwarts students. They hadn't even had time to recover from Ravenclaw's death before receiving news of Binns' passing. The deaths of 2 professors in quick succession sent the young wizards into a state of panic. But they didn't need to grieve too soon, because, in time, they would see Helena and Barrow as ghosts. Gryffindor, who had gone to the North Sea to investigate, returned that very day. He only stayed one night, didn't even attend the funeral, and left Hogwarts. With a Gryffindor gone, 3 of the original 4 great wizards were gone, leaving only Hufflepuff as the sole remaining member of Hogwarts. To stabilize morale, she naturally became Hogwarts' first headmistress. Ralph was also preparing to leave, especially after Hufflepuff had brewed the elixir of youth. The biggest problem was where to store the goblin-made jewelry he'd bought to ensure it wouldn't be stolen for 1,000 years. He initially considered burying it deep in the mountains, but considering the presence of fortune-tellers like Cassandra, if it were discovered, wouldn't they all be wiped out? After much deliberation, Ralph decided to hide it in the room of requirement. Of course, not the room where Tom hid the Horcruxes. That place was cluttered with junk, indicating many students had been there, making it far from safe. Ralph couldn't understand why Voldemort would hide such important items as Horcruxes in such a place and consider it safe. To provide a truly secure room in the room of requirement, all loopholes had to be plugged. So, Ralph asked the room of requirement for a room that only Ralph Scamander can enter, a way to prevent others from entering. After settling everything, Ralph found Cassandra again. The two had previously adventured together in the kingdom of Nadia, and before leaving, he had to say goodbye to her. However, Rove didn't rush to say goodbye. Seeing that the girl was somewhat downcast, he took her for a walk around to cheer her up, chatting about some strange tales about the future. Cassandra still forced a smile, but her mood was definitely much better than before. By the way, Rove, the key you asked me to use for divination is in the library, but for some reason, it keeps moving. Is that so? Rove thought for a moment, then suddenly realized. I know what key Professor Ravenclaw left me. He smiled and said, "Thank you, Cassandra. It's really convenient to have you around." "You're welcome." Cassandra hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Are you going back?" "Yes," Rove nodded and said, "I came to say goodbye." Cassandra fell silent. She knew that there would eventually be a parting, but she was still filled with disappointment, her face showing an undisguised sadness. Rove didn't speak, but simply walked forward with her. But even the longest corridor eventually comes to an end. Cassandra finally stopped, took off a bracelet with a small crystal ball hanging from her wrist, and said, "Ralph, this is a bracelet I made myself. I'm giving it to you as a keepsake." "Thank you, Cassandra." Ralph took the bracelet and also took out a fairy-crafted amulet as a return gift. Cassandra clutched the amulet tightly, took a deep breath, and said, "Ralph, will we ever meet again?" Ralph fell silent. They were 1,000 years apart, and barring any unforeseen circumstances, this parting would likely be their last. But Ralph still smiled softly. "Of course we'll meet again. Different paths don't necessarily mean different destinations, right?" Cassandra nodded and said, "Ralph, it's a promise. I'll wait for you." Cassandra hugged Ralph, and the boy turned and left. At the corner, he raised his arm and waved goodbye to the girl. Cassandra stared blankly into the distance until the figure disappeared. Inside the office, as Ralph entered, Hufflepuff was drawing a self-portrait. The portrait's eyes were closed, as if she were dozing. Upon seeing Ralph, she opened her eyes and scrutinized the boy. The self-portrait was remarkably similar to Hufflepuff, but the temperament was completely different, especially the eyes, which looked empty and cold. This was normal. Hufflepuff's portrait was currently like a blank sheet of paper, requiring the person herself to teach and impart various useful memories and knowledge to it before it could resemble the real person. "Ralph, I plan to have every future headmaster leave a portrait in their office," Hufflepuff said, her pen still on her hand. "That way, useful information will be passed on to each successor who stays in the headmaster's office." "A good idea," Ralph chuckled. "However, I haven't seen your portrait in the headmaster's office. That means I've hidden it," Hufflepuff said, a smirk playing on her lips. "I've left you some good things. She'll give them to you when you find my portrait." Ralph raised an eyebrow. He had indeed been searching for Hufflepuff's portrait, but hadn't found it after a long search. Hufflepuff stopped writing and asked, "Ralph, are you really not staying any longer?" "Professor, I'm afraid if I stay any longer, I won't want to leave," Ralph said earnestly. Hufflepuff sighed and took a time converter from her pocket. "Ralph, I need to borrow your time converter. It's still somewhat useful to me." "Then how will I get back?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "I've already thought of a solution for you." Professor Hufflepuff waved her wand, and a spherical magical artifact appeared, landing on the ground. Hufflepuff opened the artifact and explained, "This is a magical artifact Roanna made before, similar to your time turner. Although it's only a one-time use device, it's enough for you to go back." Ralph examined the Ravenclaw-made time machine and found it looked a lot like the spherical spaceships the Saiyans rode in Dragon Ball. The boy sat inside with curiosity and said, "Professor, I want to go back to April 25th, 1994. Don't get the time wrong, It was on that day that Ralph said goodbye to Sherry and then used the time turner to return to Halloween of the previous year. After Hufflepuff lowered the dome, she adjusted the buttons and suddenly said somewhat apologetically, "Ralph, there's something I must tell you. This magical artifact is far less stable than your time turner." "What do you mean?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "Well, simply put, it can't precisely send you back to the day you want." Hufflepuff raised her right hand, leaving a slight gap between her thumb and forefinger, and said guiltily, "There will be a slight deviation." Just as Ralph was about to jump down and demand his time tamper, Hufflepuff activated the machine, and the sphere disappeared from its spot. Hufflepuff waved goodbye with a reluctant expression. "Goodbye, little guy." Chapter 434 Cassandra's Prophecy. Helena wandered alone through the corridors. Since being killed by Barrow, she had suddenly appeared at Hogwarts, but the entire castle was deserted except for her. No students, no professors, nothing. It was like a dead city. Helena had heard her mother say that wizards who died would appear in the realm of illusion. It was a place between life and death, both reality and illusion, its appearance depending on the person who entered. Helena was certain she was wandering in the realm of illusion. She could move forward and embrace death, or she could turn back and eke out a living, but from then on, she could only be a ghost. Helena hesitated. She didn't want to become a ghost, yet she was unwilling to die, so she could only linger there. Helena wandered for an unknown amount of time when she suddenly heard a familiar, deeply moving voice. She turned sharply and saw a witch in white, her sleeves fluttering, slowly approaching. Helena froze, her eyes instantly reddening, her voice trembling with tears as she cried, "Mother!" Ravenclaw walked to Helena's side and gently stroked her daughter's cheek. Helena suddenly felt a pang of grievance. She lowered her head, softly called out "Mother," and then said sadly, "I was killed by Barrow." "I know," Ravenclaw said calmly. "Go back, child." "Go back where?" "Go back to where you came from, the magical world." Helena nodded vigorously. "I'll go back with you." "No, go by yourself." Ravenclaw gazed at Helena, shook his head, and said, "I didn't come here specifically to find you, but to die like you and enter this dreamlike realm." Helena's face was blank, shocked, and terrified. She clutched her chest, unsure whether it was the pain from her wound or the shock of this sudden news that had left her mind blank. "How could you be dead?" Helena suddenly remembered something and stammered. "Barrow said you were seriously ill, is that true?" Just then, the entire castle suddenly trembled, and some windows and floors cracked and shattered. Ravenclaw looked up at the sky, raising her arm as the tremor slowly subsided. Her voice was urgent. "Helena, I have things to do. Don't tell anyone you saw me in the dreamscape, understand?" Helena hesitated, then nodded. Ravenclaw's body gradually blurred, turning into flowing light and slowly dissipating. Helena, tears streaming down her face, reached out to grab her. Ravenclaw extended a shimmering hand, patting Helena's head, and said, "Go back." The white mist dissipated, and Helena's vision began to blur. When she could see her surroundings again, she was a pearly white, translucent ghost. Helena was filled with confusion. She drifted aimlessly forward, when suddenly she saw someone sitting not far away. After recognizing the figure, Helena realized she had left the illusionary realm and asked, "Cassandra, what are you doing here?" Cassandra, sitting on the steps, rested her chin on her hands, gazing into the distance. Hearing the sound, she turned and saw Helena, saying softly, "I just said goodbye to a very good friend, someone I may never see again. I'm sitting here grieving." "Silly beauty, you're back." Helena no longer cared about the nickname, but frowned and said, "Aren't you surprised to see me like this? I know you were killed by Barrow, so it's not surprising." Cassandra sighed softly. "You're too late. Professor Ravenclaw's funeral is already over." Helena lowered her head, though she hadn't given up hope. Hearing Cassandra's words utterly extinguished her spirit, and she slowly floated forward. She had only floated 4 or 5 steps when a faint voice suddenly sounded behind her. "The woman who stole the crown will return. The man tainted by Rowena Ravenclaw will resurrect her." Helena turned around, gazing intently at Cassandra Trelawney, who was lost in an ethereal state she had never experienced before, and murmured, "The man tainted by my mother, will he resurrect me?" As June arrived, the term drew to a close, and Hogwarts was about to face its final exams. But few were studying. The students were all enthusiastically discussing the latest issue of the Daily Prophet. The headline, written by renowned reporter Rita Skeeter, was, "Missing for 2 months. The death of hero Ralph Scamander." The article, written in the first person, recounted how Ralph was captured by Peter's accomplices during the Easter holidays, first dismembered, then boiled, and finally made into human flesh char siu buns. The vivid descriptions made it seem as if one had witnessed it firsthand, even personally tasted the char siu buns. At the end of her article, Rita Skeeter accused the Ministry of Magic of concealing the truth and deliberately covering up Scamander's death, demanding an apology to the nation. The report caused an uproar throughout the wizarding world. Who is Ralph Scamander? He was the famous young genius, the hero who captured Peter, who had been on the run for 12 years, and helped Black clear his name. He was dead. Many adult wizards wrote to their families at Hogwarts, and it was quickly confirmed that Scamander had indeed been missing since Easter. The fact that he was only reported missing 2 months later further confirmed the veracity of Rita's article. Public opinion was in an uproar. After a year of reporting, Ralph's fame had reached a terrifying level. He had a large following. Even many witches called him their little husband, and of course, they demanded an explanation from the Ministry of Magic for their husband's murder. Fudge was also deeply troubled. He even personally went to Hogwarts to find Dumbledore and ask what had happened. The Quidditch World Cup was about to begin, and at this sensitive time, if something happened to Scamander, who would dare to come to England to watch the games? This summer, Fudge was also supposed to be awarded the Order of Merlin. If he really died, Fudge would be out of a job as minister. But Dumbledore didn't tell Fudge where he had gone, only giving the vague statement, he went to deal with Peter, and dismissed him. That morning, the students were in class when suddenly a deafening sound came from the sky. Everyone looked out the window and saw a spherical flying machine descending from the sky, making a creaking sound and accompanied by a dazzling burst of flame. It smashed straight through the castle wall and crashed into the depths of the castle. Professor McGonagall's mouth dropped open, her face filled with astonishment. She had been at Hogwarts for decades and had never seen anything like it. Had Muggles invaded Hogwarts? Shirley, who had been taking notes, suddenly changed her expression. She stood up, forgetting that she was still in class, and hurriedly ran outside. Reaching the door, she abruptly stopped, staring expectantly at Professor McGonagall. Is he back? Professor McGonagall frowned, then quickly relaxed, unable to resist a smile. Then what are you waiting for? Go on. The girl with the ponytail smiled at Professor McGonagall, then jogged out of the classroom, running faster and faster. Chapter 435 Snape with a Broken Back. In the potions classroom, Snape wandered around, glancing briefly at Hermione's cauldron, finding nothing wrong, before moving on to the next student. He inspected each student's cauldron before finally approaching Harry's, saving the best for last. Sure enough, upon seeing Harry's potion, a horrible sneer immediately spread across Snape's face. The Slytherin students looked up with interest. They loved hearing Snape's sarcastic remarks about Harry. Malfoy, in particular, jumped up excitedly from his seat, eager for the spectacle. Snape's eyes, perched on his hooked nose, glanced at the cauldron and sneered. Potter, what are you brewing? Asthma potion, Harry said nervously. Asthma potion? What color should it be? Harry quickly glanced at the blackboard and said, green. Green. Snape scooped a little potion out with a spoon, then let it splash back into the cauldron so everyone could see it. Then tell me, what color is the potion you brewed? Harry, forcing a smile, answered, red. Potter, tell me the truth, I won't blame you. Are you crazy? Snape asked patiently. Red-green color blindness. Malfoy, playing along, laughed loudly. No, Professor, Harry said in a low voice. Then something seeped into your eyes, Snape said softly. Read me line 5 of the instructions, Potter. Harry looked up at the blackboard and reluctantly read, add bellflower powder, stir counterclockwise 3 times, then add fritillaria, boil for 3 minutes, then add a drop of styrax syrup. Harry's heart sank. He whispered, I forgot to add fritillaria. Malfoy was about to laugh when he suddenly remembered that he seemed to have forgotten to add bellflower powder. No wonder his potion was black and had a strong body odor. But it didn't matter. When Professor Snape passed by his cauldron, he not only didn't criticize him, but even added 5 points. I know you forgot, Potter. This means this cauldron of junk is completely useless. Gryffindor minus 10 points. Snape raised his wand and said, vanish. Harry's potion vanished instantly. He stood beside the empty cauldron, his face grim, glaring at Snape. What, you're not happy? Snape stared into Harry's eyes and sneered. Are you planning to go complain to your foolish godfather like a little baby again? I heard Black was bitten by a snake and almost died. Snape mocked. You'd better not go to him, let him recover in peace. Harry clenched his fists, wanting to break Snape's hooked nose. Just then, a huge explosion suddenly came from upstairs. Everyone looked up, confused about what was happening, only to see a spherical object burst through the wall and crash down. Snape immediately stepped in front of Harry, raising his wand and casting an ironclad charm. The spherical aircraft finally slowed down, but the ironclad charm was still smashed to pieces, crashing towards the ground. Everyone stared blankly at the spherical aircraft. Ralph, sitting in the cockpit, felt the sphere finally stop and breathed a sigh of relief. He had thought that with a cockpit, he could lie down and take a nap. But the boy had overestimated its instability. The entire sphere was constantly undergoing Brownian motion, shaking erratically, making him feel like he was going to cough up his lungs. That damned Hufflepuff, he didn't want to see her again. Ralph kicked open the hatch and staggered out. Seeing a large group of students surrounding him, all familiar faces, he was immediately overjoyed. Ralph was truly afraid of walking out and seeing 18-year-old Dumbledore, or Newt before he was expelled from school, or even 16-year-old Tom. Rolf, Hermione squeezed through the crowd, running over excitedly. "You're back," the little girl patted her budding chest, finally relieved, and smiled brightly. "You were gone for 2 months. Sherry and I were so worried. We thought you weren't coming back." 2 months, Rolf frowned, then sighed. "Hufflepuff is so unreliable." "Who?" Hermione asked, puzzled. "This isn't the place to talk. I'll tell you later." Rolf looked around at the students, puzzled. "Hey, isn't this the potions classroom? Where's Professor Snape? Where did he go?" Harry, who had just been pushed aside by Snape, pointed blankly to the ground. "Rolf, Snape was crushed under your flying machine. Damn it, why didn't you say so sooner?" Ralph quickly waved his wand, moving the spherical timecraft aside to reveal Snape. He helped Snape up, apologetically asking, "Professor, are you alright?" "Ouch, my back," Snape gasped, gritting his teeth. "Scamander, you attacked the professor. Hufflepuff deduct 50 points. Ralph released his grip, and Snape collapsed to the ground again, followed by another series of slurping sounds and screams. Snape was about to deduct more points when a phoenix suddenly appeared. Ralph immediately grabbed Fawkes's tail, winked at Hermione, and said, "Professor Dumbledore wants to see me. We'll talk later. You'd better take Professor Snape to the school hospital. His back seems to be broken." "Hermione." After the boy finished speaking, a ball of flame appeared, and his figure vanished into thin air, leaving a group of students looking at each other in bewilderment. In the headmaster's office, Ralph sat in a chair and briefly recounted what had happened to him. After listening silently, Dumbledore's eyes widened in amazement. "Rolf," he said, "I suspected you might have returned to the wrong time, but I never expected you to have returned to the era of the 4 great leaders." "Neither did I," Ralph sighed. "It's like I've had a very long dream, my mind filled with all sorts of questions." "Like what?" "Like Slytherin," Ralph said seriously. "That basilisk should be his Horcrux. He might still be alive. Whether it's Slytherin's Horcrux or not, we'll find out during the summer holidays," Dumbledore said calmly. "You don't need to worry too much. Even if he really is alive now, the fact that he hasn't done anything all these years means his condition is also very bad." Ralph nodded. Just then, the silverware on the table began to spin, emitting a large amount of smoke. "All right, Ralph, that's enough for today," Dumbledore said with a smile. "You've just returned, so this old man won't take up any more of your time." The old man blinked and said, "There are people waiting for you outside. I'll allow you to skip class for the next few days." Ralph quickly left the headmaster's office. Standing in the corridor, he saw the ponytail-wearing girl running towards him, panting. A smile finally appeared on his face. Chapter 436 Ralph and Shirley. Ralph stood in the corridor and whistled softly, the sound clear and melodious. "Which house is this student from?" "Skipping class in broad daylight and loitering in the corridors. Be careful he doesn't get points deducted." Hearing that familiar voice, Shirley turned around abruptly. Seeing Ralph, her face lit up with undisguised joy. She walked gracefully towards the boy, suppressing a smile, and said, "I only skipped 1 class. Someone skipped for 2 months. Don't you think he should be expelled from Hogwarts?" "Someone skipped for 2 months?" Ralph feigned surprise, exclaiming, "That kind of student is truly lawless. I wholeheartedly support expulsion." He smiled and said, "I'll have him pack his things and leave the school right now." "Beautiful lady, are you satisfied?" "The punishment is a bit harsh." Shirley blinked, smiling softly in her sweet voice. We can hold him under observation for a while instead of expelling him. I'll observe him personally and see how he behaves. Ralph looked at the girl with the ponytail, spread his arms, and smiled gently, his eyes narrowing. Come on, you can observe me from the outside and now, no need to wait until later. Shirley gave a heavy hum through her nose, unable to contain her excitement any longer. Overjoyed yet aggrieved, she ran towards the boy, laughing and crying, and hugged him tightly, her voice trembling slightly. Rolf, you're finally back. Rolf, staggering slightly, also smiled and embraced Shirley, sniffing her ponytail gently, and said softly, I'm sorry, I promised to come back early, but I'm so late. It's okay, it's good you're safe. I was so worried about you, Shirley said haltingly, tears streaming down her face. Rolf's hand slid down, grasping the girl's delicate waist, and he gently lifted her, spinning her around in the corridor. Shirley didn't struggle or resist, but her earlobes were already flushed red as she tried her best to calm herself, preventing her chest from trembling too much. The girl with the ponytail looked nervous and said softly, Don't do it here, someone might see us. It's alright, Rolf smiled. I just checked, there's no one else here. That stone statue is watching us. Rolf put Shirley down, turned his head, and chuckled. It's just a stupid drooping stone beast. It's no problem, you two are the stupid ones. The drooping stone beast guarding the entrance to the principal's office muttered discontentedly. Your whole family is stupid. The boy and girl exchanged a glance and grinned in unison. Rolf gently released his grip, took a step back, and looked at Shirley more closely. The girl with the ponytail was still wearing a simple black robe, a little taller, but not by much. Her stunningly beautiful face had become even more breathtaking in the months since he last saw her. Rolf stared at her for a long time, then reached out to wipe away the tears from Shirley's eyes, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He smiled and said, Come on, smile again. The girl with the ponytail smiled through her tears. She straightened her disheveled clothes, bent down to pick up the black suitcase from the ground, and said softly, Your suitcase, you can carry it for now. Rolf didn't take the suitcase, but instead took out a cross pendant from his neck and handed it back to Shirley, saying, Thank you for your amulet, it protected me all the way. Shirley took the warm pendant and hung it back around her neck. She smiled and said, Shall we take a walk? Rolf nodded, and they walked side by side, strolling leisurely down the empty corridor, stopping and starting aimlessly. Sherry asked curiously, How did you get back in a spherical flying machine? That's not a flying machine, but a magical item similar to a time converter, Rove explained. I gave away my time converter, so I had to use that thing to get back, but it's very unstable, causing me to be off time by a full 2 months. Rove then suddenly smiled mysteriously. I originally went back to last Halloween, but due to an accident, I accidentally used the time converter again and went back to an even more distant past. You'll never guess which era I went back to. The girl with the ponytail thought seriously for a moment and guessed, the era of the 4 grades. Rove stared in disbelief, his face full of shock. You guessed that? Sherry covered her mouth and chuckled. I couldn't have guessed, but since you said so, it's all about being as unbelievable as possible, right? Rove sincerely praised. Amazing. So, you really went back 1,000 years? Sherry blinked in surprise. Yes, it really was 1,000 years ago, Ralph nodded. I met Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Gryffindor, and I even ran into Professor Trelawney's great-great-grandmother, Cassandra. She was just a little girl about our age. I also helped Gryffindor retrieve their sword, attended Ravenclaw's funeral, and witnessed Professor Binns become a ghost. Ralph recounted his experiences to the girl with the ponytail, finally laughing. It's a very long story, it'll take a long time to tell. Why don't you stay in your dorm tonight? I'll tell you the whole story from the box. Sherry smiled but didn't speak, simply tilting her head back and gazing at Ralph. Don't misunderstand, I just didn't want to interfere with your classes during the day, so I'm talking to you tonight, Ralph said, looking every bit the gentleman. I absolutely have no bad intentions. I swear on Professor Hufflepuff, I would love to stay, but Professor McGonagall probably won't agree, Sherry said regretfully. What does that have to do with Professor McGonagall? Ralph asked curiously. Professor McGonagall knows you're back, Sherry said with a smile. Knowing her temper, she'll definitely be checking the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw common rooms tonight to see if we're in our dorms. Ralph chuckled, she's so nosy. A Gryffindor headmistress, it's one thing to manage Hermione, but why should she care about our Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw? Sherry smiled. Professor McGonagall is our vice headmaster. Ralph sighed and instinctively gripped the handle of his suitcase. Sherry suppressed a laugh. I'm not tired. Ralph looked bewildered. Sherry smiled. If you're really worried about me getting tired, you can carry the suitcase yourself and let me take my hand off. The girl was holding the suitcase handle, but now Ralph also grabbed the handle, and thus, he was holding her hand. Ralph didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he held her small hand tightly and said softly, Shirley, I was almost trapped 1,000 years in the past, unable to come back. It's so good to see you. Shirley fell silent. After a moment, she looked up, gazing intently at Ralph, biting her lip to try and hold back her tears. She said earnestly, Ralph, I knew you would come back. If you really didn't come back, I would steal the time turner from the Ministry of Magic and go find you. Even if I searched through all the past, I would eventually meet you again. Ralph stroked Shirley's head gently and said, Thank you, thanks to love to see a few weeks and just love to wade through water for their generous donations. Chapter 437 Dumbledore, you'll regret this. The news of Ralph Scamander's return swept through Hogwarts like a storm. Many students, however, believed it was false. The reason was simple. Similar rumors had circulated daily in the weeks leading up to Scamander's disappearance. The boy who cried wolf had become too frequent, and everyone had stopped believing it. Marcus Flint of Slytherin was even more certain. Scamander is definitely dead. Rita Skeeter's report couldn't be false. I'm betting you, if he really comes back, I'll immediately go to the washroom and devour 2 large bowls of food. However, Flint quickly regretted his words, because at dinner time, that familiar figure, surrounded by a group of Hufflepuff students, entered the Great Hall. Many students were initially stunned, but upon confirming it was Ralph, they erupted in deafening cheers and applause, nearly shaking the enchanted ceiling. Ralph was taken aback by the enthusiastic welcome. He hadn't expected such a warm welcome for his return. After a moment of surprise, he waved to everyone. At the Slytherin table, Flint looked quite grim. Malfoy laughed loudly at him. Marcus, you can have mine tonight. I've had diarrhea lately, so I'll make you something thinner. Amidst the students' cheers, Malfoy couldn't help but clap along. His feelings for Ralph were complicated. The guy had bullied and extorted him quite a bit, but after Ralph's 2-month disappearance, he always felt something was missing. It was like seeing Harry and not going up to him and flirting with him. Malfoy felt uneasy. Now, seeing Ralph again, Malfoy immediately felt better. At the faculty table, Snape, whose back injury had been healed by Madame Pomfrey, watched Ralph, who was being treated like a hero, with a gloomy expression. Dumbledore pushed a plate of beef tripe and beef jerky next to Snape, smiling. Severus, this is a dish I had the kitchen prepare especially for you. It's good for your back injury, so please try it. Snape looked at the dish, his eyelids twitching, and politely declined, saying, You eat it, Professor Dumbledore. You're getting old, you need to eat more. The two of them, sharing the same plate, kept refusing to eat. Snape suddenly remembered something, his expression shifting. Headmaster, he said, I heard Black, he's planning to resign. That's true. Dumbledore nodded. I tried to persuade Sirius, but he's adamant. This summer, we're going to be hiring a new professor to teach defense against the dark arts. Good heavens, we're going through a teacher shortage so quickly, aren't we? Snape's eyes gleamed. Perhaps I could give it a try. I submit my application to you every year. You? Dumbledore scrutinized Snape through his half-moon spectacles. To be honest, Severus, I have considered you. Come, try this beef testicle first. We can talk while you eat. Snape's face fell, but to become the defense against the dark arts professor, he forced himself to swallow a few beef testicles whole. He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. Professor Dumbledore, what about the position of defense against the dark arts? I already have someone in mind. Severus, Dumbledore smiled. You should continue teaching potions. This position can't do without you. Snape glared at the old man, roaring angrily, Dumbledore, you'll regret this. Just then, a commotion arose at the door. Filch, panting heavily, rushed into the Great Hall, his voice shrill. Professor Dumbledore, Minister Fudge is here. Let him in. Dumbledore stood up, leaving the table to greet him. Soon, Fudge entered the Great Hall, wearing a long purple cloak and a dark green top hat tucked under his arm, followed by a large entourage of wizards. One might mistake him for someone arresting a criminal. Fudge walked up to Dumbledore, extended his hand, and said, Good evening, Albus. I apologize for disturbing your meal. I heard that Ralph has returned, so I came to check on things myself. Is the news true? The students immediately erupted in an uproar. They hadn't expected that Ralph's return would even alarm the Minister of Magic. At the Gryffindor table, Seamus exclaimed incredulously, I heard the Minister for Magic is very busy, and he came to Hogwarts personally for such a trivial matter. Trivial matter, Ron said speechlessly. How could it be trivial? Do you know how busy the Ministry has been lately because of Ralph's situation, especially after Rita Skeeter's report came out? Every day there are letters flooding the Ministry, demanding they investigate the truth, and even criticizing the Minister for incompetence. Seeing many students looking at him, Ron blushed and quickly explained, Oh, my dad said that. He works at the Ministry and deals with the highest-ranking figures. He said Ralph's fame is now greater than Minister Fudge's. Upon seeing Ralph, Fudge breathed a sigh of relief and said, Child, it's so good that you're safe and sound. If you hadn't come back, I really would have sent all the Aurors to look for you. Thank you for your concern, Minister Fudge, Ralph said politely. Fudge didn't want to make such a fuss, but these were sensitive times, and Ralph couldn't afford to get into any trouble. Fudge lowered his voice again and asked, So, what happened to Peter and that time-turner? That day at Hogsmeade, he had seen the resurrected Peter, and Dumbledore had said he had stolen the time-turner. Fudge had been on tenterhooks for a long time, worried that Peter would return to 12 years ago and save the Dark Lord from the clutches of the boy who had miraculously survived. Peter is definitely dead. He detonated the time-turner, let it explode. As long as Peter is dead, Fudge didn't care about the destruction of the time-turner, but he was terrified that Peter would reappear in public. He eagerly embraced Ralph, pulled the boy in front of him, and announced, Ralph is back, the rumors are debunked. I remind certain unscrupulous reporters again, the newspapers are not above the law. A burst of dazzling flashes erupted in the Great Hall. Fudge had even brought reporters from various newspapers, ready to inform the entire wizarding world of this good news as soon as possible. Ralph, we'll both be on the front page of the Daily Prophet tomorrow. Everyone'll be happy to hear you're back. That Rita Skeeter woman is just spreading rumors. I'll make her pay. What should have been a pleasant dinner turned into a mini press conference, with a group of reporters bombarding him with questions. After casually answering a few, Ralph excused himself to use the restroom and slipped away. He entered the men's restroom, and just as he unzipped his pants to relieve himself, he suddenly heard a woman's soft sigh behind him. Ralph jumped in fright, almost losing control of his gun and firing the shot. He quickly turned around and saw Helena, wearing a pleated skirt adorned with intricate lace, standing behind him, staring intently at him, and softly calling out, Ralph. Her voice was low and choked with sobs. Chapter 438 Sherry and Hermione's Gift. Ralph stared at Helena in astonishment, speechless for a moment. Sneaking into the men's restroom was Myrtle's favorite pastime. She also liked to whistle indecently through the door while others were using the toilet. Ralph had been harassed by her many times and was thoroughly annoyed. How could the usually proud Helena be becoming like Myrtle? Helena also stared blankly at Ralph, her gaze involuntarily glancing downwards. Ralph quickly pulled up his trousers. Blocked in the men's restroom by the 1,000-year-old female ghost, he coughed and said, Helena, what are you doing here? This is the men's restroom, I know, but you were missing for 2 months. I heard you were back, so I wanted to come and see you. Helena raised her gaze briefly, looking at Rove with a deep look, and said, You're always surrounded by students, so I could only take advantage of this break to come and find you. Hearing Helena say this, what could Rove say? He could only say softly, I didn't disappear, I just had some things to do. But, that scent of my mother on you, gone? Rove asked in surprise. It's even stronger now, Helena said. Rove thought that after 1,000 years, it would have disappeared. It seems that time cannot erase that scent. On the contrary, because Rove met Ravenclaw and had physical contact with her, the scent he picked up has become even stronger. Rove still couldn't help but sniff his clothes, but he only smelled the fresh scent of laundry detergent. That day by the Well of Death, Rove had also smelled the scent of Ravenclaw's skin, a unique and alluring fragrance. He didn't have that scent on himself. What kind of nose does Helena have? Helena, what exactly is that scent you're talking about? Rove asked. It's not a scent. Helena hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. Rove, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. My mother told me not to tell anyone. When you revive me and I give myself to you, I'll tell you. Never mind then. Helena asked curiously, Rove, Where have you been these past 2 months? I went to a very far place. Rove blinked and smiled. It's a secret, and I can't tell you yet. When you tell me your secret, I'll tell you. Rove ignored Helena and walked to the bathroom door, locking it first to prevent reporters from suddenly barging in. If they captured this scene, it would be disastrous. He cautiously glanced around, making sure there were no beetles like Rita Skeeter in the washroom, before finally relaxing. Helena, I want to ask you something, Ralph said after a moment's thought. Do you know where the entrance to Professor Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets is? Ravenclaw had entrusted her Chamber of Secrets and the Well of Death to Ralph. But 1,000 years had passed, and the original entrance had been replaced by a washroom. Corvinus Gaunt had also built a sewer system connecting the washroom to Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. Ralph had found it increasingly difficult to locate the entrance to Ravenclaw's room. But Helena, as a 1,000-year-old ghost, certainly knew. Helena stared wide-eyed at Ralph, but quickly suppressed her shock, striving to remain calm as she asked, Ralph, how do you know my mother left behind a Chamber of Secrets? Only a very few people know about it, even the headmasters of all ages are unaware. I only went in once by chance and was quickly kicked out, Ralph smiled. If he told Helena that he had not only entered her mother's secret room, but had been personally guided by Ravenclaw himself, it would probably terrify her. I naturally have my sources of information, Ralph said with a mysterious smile. Can you find the entrance? Even if you know the entrance, you can't get into the room. My mother locked it. Helena shook her head. After I became a ghost, I tried to go in and take a look, but I was blocked. Ralph grinned. It's all right, I have the key. Helena could no longer suppress her shock. She stared intently at Ralph, as if trying to see through the boy, but the more she looked at him, the more mysterious he seemed. It had only been 2 months, yet Ralph was still the same Ralph, his appearance unchanged, but he seemed to know many secrets, becoming more composed and calm. Helena was silent for a moment, then said softly, the entrance is in the restricted area of the library, hidden behind the bookshelf. I'll take you there next time. Ralph nodded and smiled. Thank you, you silly beauty. Helena stared blankly at Ralph, her expression one of utter despair. She hadn't heard that title in almost 1,000 years. The last time was after she left the illusionary realm, when she met Cassandra Trelawney. Then, she received a prophecy. Helena had waited 1,000 years. At this moment, she was finally certain that she had waited for the right person. After Ralph left the auditorium, he never returned, and the small press conference held by Minister Fudge ended without a trace. Fudge didn't care much, as the purpose of his trip had been achieved. The next morning, major newspapers published articles refuting the rumors, written by Umbridge at Minister Fudge's behest. The articles didn't need much content. A photograph of Ralph and Fudge together was enough to explain everything. Rita Skeeter's face was swollen from being slapped. Many of Ralph's fans had started writing letters to her, cursing her to give birth to sons without an anus. Some more extreme fans even planned to deliver local specialties to Rita's house, scaring her into fleeing overnight and moving to a more secluded safe house. In contrast, Hogwarts was much quieter. Most of the young wizards were speculating about what Ralph had been doing for the past 2 months. Most students were making wild guesses about the spherical object he had been riding in. Many students from Muggle families believed it was a Muggle-made flying machine, while others went so far as to believe that Ralph had experienced third-kind contact and had been taken to breed by an alien witch. However, Ralph paid no attention to these rumors. His entire attention was drawn to Sherry and Hermione. As a sign of their long-awaited reunion, the two had prepared gifts for him but wouldn't say what they were, making Ralph eagerly anticipate them for days. They finally revealed them near the end of the term. Inside the black box, Ralph followed Sherry and Hermione along a path deeper into the woods. Ralph, your gift is over here. Hermione skipped ahead, leading the way. Hurry up, what is it? Ralph asked, increasingly curious. And why is it hidden so deep? It's the one you've been dreaming about, the one you've been longing for, Sherry said softly with a smile. That's right, Hermione winked at Ralph. So it has to be kept secret, no one can see it. Sherry and I prepared this carefully for you, it's absolutely what you've wanted most. Ralph glanced at the two girls. Did they really know what he'd been longing for? If it really was that, it was certainly exciting. Sherry and Hermione suddenly disappeared into the grove and quickly pushed out a large cage. Hermione pulled back the curtain and laughed, tap tap tap. The one you've wanted most, a Dementor, aren't you surprised? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439 Final Exam. To hunt down Peter Pettigrew, Fudge planted a large number of Dementors near Hogwarts. One of these Dementors was lurking in the secret passage from Honeydukes to Hogwarts, a creature Ralph had coveted for a long time but had never managed to capture. Sherry and Hermione knew this, so they secretly captured it and presented it as a gift to Ralph, who had returned after a long absence. Both of them knew the Patronus charm, so capturing a Dementor in a narrow passage was no problem for them. Although the gift Sherry and Hermione gave was a far cry from the gift Ralph had imagined, it was still a pleasant surprise. Of course, as guards of Azkaban, Dementors were officially registered with the Ministry of Magic. The mysterious disappearance of a Dementor would certainly be investigated thoroughly by the Ministry, but there were no cameras in the passage, so the investigation wouldn't trace back to Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione. Even if they did eventually find the box, once they found the box, what was the small crime of illegally imprisoning a Dementor? A casual glance inside the box revealed enough illegal activities to keep Ralph studying at Azkaban High School for 1,000 years. He was already utterly wicked. With his new toy, Ralph immediately electrified a Dementor and began a comprehensive training of it. However, after only a few days of this, Sherry and Hermione dragged him to the library for extra lessons. He'd been skipping classes for 2 months and definitely needed the two girls to give him a crash course. Ralph had actually audited classes for over a month 1,000 years ago, but he'd only learned things like the Cruciatus Curse or the Imperious Curse. Their teaching systems were completely different. Soon, the final exams for the school year arrived. The first exam was on Transfiguration, and the questions were as difficult as ever. For the Transfiguration practical exam, Professor McGonagall even asked everyone to transform a scalding hot teapot into a crawling turtle. Neville cast a spell, shattering the teapot into pieces, splashing hot water everywhere. He also successfully burned his own arm, becoming the first student to enter the school hospital. Hannah's teapot sprouted 4 claws, carrying it as it slowly crawled on the ground. Susan transformed into a turtle, but it couldn't move, and steam billowed from its mouth. One might mistake it for a steam turtle. Ralph transformed into a sea turtle with intricate and beautiful patterns on its shell, though it looked somewhat like a soft-shelled turtle. Professor McGonagall still gave it full marks. During the charms exam, Professor Flitwick asked the students to cast the happiness charm. Ralph teamed up with Neville, which made many students hold their breath for him. During the Transfiguration exam, Neville had shattered the teapot. Who knew if his happiness charm would also have an explosive effect? Ralph, however, wasn't afraid. He had spider sense and could sense danger in advance. Fortunately, Neville succeeded, but not completely. His happiness charm didn't make Ralph happy, but rather somewhat depressed. Ralph pretended to laugh, but Professor Flitwick saw through his act immediately, and he lost a point instead of his full marks. During the magical creature protection exam, Hagrid assigned everyone to care for a salamander and draw its blood. Salamander blood possesses healing and restorative properties, which can be used to make enhancement agents. However, they are aggressive, can burn enemies, and cannot be left unattended for long, making it a true test of the student's skills. Ralph first fed the salamander chili peppers to ensure its survival outside the flames, then froze it with an ice spell. His technique was skillful, completing the blood draw quickly, earning him full marks from Hagrid. After Ralph finished the exam, Hagrid patted the boy on the shoulder excitedly. "Ralph, I attended the hearing last week, and the Ministry of Magic's Department of Education declared Buckbeak innocent." "Yes, I heard it from Sherry, and I also received a letter from Lady Gershilda Marchban." Ralph smiled. "What have you been up to lately?" "I haven't seen you much. A wounded sphinx appeared in the Forbidden Forest, and I've been taking care of it," Hagrid explained. A sphinx? Ralph immediately became excited. That was a magical creature from Greece, rarely seen in England. "Hagrid, I'm free during the summer holidays. How about I send it back to Greece for you?" Sherry, who was drawing blood from a fire lizard, wanted to laugh but couldn't, feeling a bit uncomfortable holding it in. Last time, Ralph had offered to help Hagrid send the fire dragon Norbert to Romania, but ended up sending it to his own suitcase instead. "I'm really not in a good position lately, Ralph," Hagrid said in a low voice. "That sphinx is in heat, She's very irritable. I have to help her satisfy her needs first." Ralph glanced at Hagrid. His physique could indeed help the Sphinx smoothly get through its heat cycle, but wasn't that a bit too much of a grotesque thing? During the potions exam, Ralph ran into big trouble. Snape was still holding a grudge against Ralph for breaking his back, and stood next to him watching the potion-making process the whole time. Ralph's potion was perfect, but Professor Snape still wrote a big 0 on the boy's grade. This left Ralph speechless. The Defense Against the Dark Arts exam was a kind of obstacle course where a series of magical creatures would appear, requiring students to fight against them and successfully complete the course. This was easy for Ralph. He completed it in the shortest time. "Perfect, full marks, Ralph," Sirius said happily. "And, it's been a long time, welcome back." The two had indeed not seen each other for a long time. Even though Ralph had been back for some time, he hadn't seen Sirius. During the Easter mission, Sirius was bitten by Voldemort and poisoned by snake venom. Although Fawkes tears could cure the poison, the wound still contained dark magic. He had been hospitalized at St. Mungo's to recover and had only returned to school these past 2 days. "You've lost a lot of weight," Ralph asked with concern. "Are you alright?" "I'm fine, but Voldemort's magic is indeed powerful," Sirius sighed. "Otherwise, how could you be the Dark Lord?" Ralph comforted him. "Sirius, the mission failure really isn't your fault. You don't need to blame yourself too much. There's no need to resign so easily. It's not entirely because of that." Sirius shook his head, explaining, "I've realized I'm not suited to be a professor. I don't like being tied down. Preparing lessons and grading assignments every day is already annoying enough. If I stay at the school, I'll keep arguing with Snape, and we might even fight one day, making things difficult for everyone. Besides, now that I know Voldemort isn't dead, I want to try tracking him down." Sirius's eyes were resolute. Ralph didn't offer any words of comfort. That was just Sirius's personality. He wasn't afraid of death, as long as he could get revenge. Besides, because of Tom's curse, no wizard had ever served in the Defense Against the Dark Arts for more than a year. Sirius had just escaped with his life. If he continued teaching, he probably would die very soon. So, his resignation was a good thing. Of course, for the next unlucky one Dumbledore was targeting, it might not be good news. After the Defense Against the Dark Arts exam, Ralph faced his divination exam. This was the final exam, and the one Ralph had been most looking forward to. He would finally see Trelawney again. She was Cassandra's great-great-granddaughter, a descendant of an old friend. Chapter 440 Trelawney's Prophecy. On the day of the divination exam, all the students gathered in the hallway, waiting for Professor Trelawney to call their names before entering the room. This one-on-one assessment undoubtedly increased everyone's psychological burden. Many students were still holding copies of Seeing the Future Through the Fog, hoping to memorize some useful information at the last minute. Each student who stepped out of the classroom was immediately surrounded by a cacophony of questions. "What did Professor Trelawney ask? Did you pass?" However, the students who had been tested refused to answer, their mysterious expressions only fueling everyone's tension and curiosity. When Susan finally emerged, Macmillan couldn't hold back any longer and complained, "Susan, what questions did Professor Trelawney ask? What are you afraid of?" "She's not even here," Susan shushed him, nervously replying. "She's everywhere." Earl Macmillan, a familiar, indistinct voice suddenly rang out above them. Macmillan snorted and quickly climbed the silver staircase. Just before entering the room, he turned and made a face at everyone, saying, "I'll tell you the test questions when I get back." 10 minutes later, Macmillan emerged looking dejected, clearly having done poorly on the test. "How did it go, Earl?" Justin put his arm around Macmillan's neck and asked, "What exactly did Professor Trelawney ask you?" Macmillan's expression was strange. He hesitated, then finally shook his head, saying, "I can't say. Professor Trelawney said the crystal ball told her that if I told you, something terrible would happen." Soon it was Hannah's turn. She stayed in the room for 20 minutes before lightly descending the stairs. As one of Professor Trelawney's most devoted followers, Hannah beamed with pride, laughing, "Perfect score. Professor Trelawney just praised me, saying I possess all the qualities to open my heavenly eye." Everyone looked on with envy. "Oh, right, Ralph, Trelawney asked me to call you up," Hannah said. Ralph was flipping through a book titled The Breeding of the Sphinx. He nodded, picked up his suitcase, and went up the silver staircase to the attic, pushing open the door. The curtains were drawn, making the room extremely dark. The only light came from the fireplace, filling it with a somber red glow. Professor Trelawney was sitting behind a table, in front of her a large crystal ball. "Hello, dear," she said gently, "look at this crystal ball. I'll time you now, and then tell me what you see inside." Ralph sat on a round stool covered in thick wool felt, leaning over the crystal ball. He saw nothing but his own reflection. "Books, several books." What books?" Professor Trelawney leaned closer and asked in a low voice. "Child, look more closely. Can you see the titles?" "The History of Merlin and King Arthur's Fall," Ralph replied. "The price is also marked on the back, 9 sickles, 15 nat." Professor Trelawney, who had been writing with a quill, suddenly trembled upon hearing the boy's words, spilling large amounts of ink onto the parchment. "Ralph, you're probably mistaken. Look again." Professor Trelawney stared at the crystal ball, her voice ethereal. "I'll make an exception and give you a hint. There are no books in the crystal ball, only a figure." "Professor, you're right." Ralph looked up, staring at Trelawney, and smiled. "I also saw a blurry figure, a witch. It looks like Cassandra Trelawney." Ralph straightened up, staring into Trelawney's eyes. "Professor, those heirlooms you sold me, they didn't even cost 10 gallons in total, yet you charged me 1,000. Shouldn't we settle the score?" "Keep your voice down, child." Trelawney quickly glanced at the door and lowered her voice. "I didn't force you. We're doing fair business. No cheating." "No cheating? How dare you say such a thing?" Ralph grabbed Trelawney's sleeve, relentlessly demanding. "Do you really think I'm a sucker? Hurry up, give me my money back." "I have no money," Trelawney said firmly. "I used all those galleons to buy wine." "Then let's go find Professor McGonagall to settle this," Rove laughed. "Professor Trelawney, you don't want Professor McGonagall to find out you cheated me, do you?" Trelawney glared at Rove, crossed her arms, and shrugged, seemingly trying to protect herself from this rude threat. She also regretted listening to her great-great-grandmother's advice and selling those tattered books to Rove. "Rove, how about this? I'll give you a perfect score on your divination exam, okay?" Professor Trelawney pleaded. "You lost to me in our bet last time, so you should have given me full marks." Rove shook his head. "This compensation won't do. I'm not satisfied." "Then what do you want me to do?" Trelawney asked. "You can make a request, as long as it's not too unreasonable. I can agree to it." Rove had been waiting for Trelawney to say this. He smiled and said, "I want to see Cassandra." "Did she leave behind a portrait?" Professor Trelawney looked at Rove strangely. "You keep calling her Cassandra. She was her great-great-grandmother. Don't be so familiar with her, as if you two are very close." "Rove, my great-great-grandmother did leave behind a portrait." Trelawney stood up, walked to the wall, and pulled back a curtain, revealing a portrait, but it was empty. "She wasn't always here. I rarely see her." Rove frowned. "Did Cassandra leave me anything else?" "She did." Trelawney nodded, her expression serious. "My great-great-grandmother left you a prophecy." "What prophecy?" Rove perked up. Trelawney cleared her throat and recited, "When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, the dead will be resurrected, and the old demons will return. Lions and snakes, eagles and badgers, are all believable. Sons of snakes, mothers of dragons, are not believable." Ralph waited a long time, then looked at Professor Trelawney, astonished, and said, That's it. Professor Trelawney adjusted her shawl and said, "My great-great-grandmother only told me these few words, and asked me to pass them on to you." Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Professor, could you interpret it for me?" "Ralph, the heavenly eye is not for interpreting prophecies," Professor Trelawney said with an air of superiority. She adjusted her shawl and the many strings of shimmering beads, then suddenly whispered, 1,000 galleons, and I'll interpret it for you." Ralph turned and left, slamming the door shut behind him as he exited the room. "How rude." Trelawney wrote a perfect score on Ralph's report card, then muttered under her breath, "How come great-great-grandma and Ralph are so close? What's their relationship?" Chapter 441 Rove's Invitation. Ralph didn't see Cassandra's portrait, but he received a prophecy, so the trip wasn't entirely in vain, although he still didn't quite understand it. Well, to be more precise, he didn't understand it at all. But prophecies are often like that, they never speak plainly, as if afraid others will understand them, like an old Chinese medicine prescription. The day you understand it, you suddenly feel it's fake. After Ralph finished his divination exam, he hurried out of the North Tower and encountered Sherry and Hermione waiting for him. The two girls had also just finished their arithmetic divination exam and were standing in the corridor, tilting their heads together, comparing their answers. Ralph walked over and asked with a smile, "How did you two do on your exams?" "Not so good. I bombed my arithmetic divination exam," Hermione sighed dejectedly. "I wrote at least one number table wrong, and Sherry's answer was correct." Sigh. "I clearly reviewed similar expressions in numerology and grammar before the exam," the little girl sighed, looking pitiful, as if she was about to cry. Ralph comforted her, "It's okay, as long as you did well in your other subjects, but I didn't do well in the other subjects either. My defense against the dark arts practical class was a complete disaster." Hermione wrung her hands together, her face full of worry. "I thought I did okay on the transfiguration test, but looking back now, it was terrible too." Ralph leaned back slightly, squinting at Hermione, and said, "You'd better be talking about yourself." "It's me," Hermione said dejectedly. "I think I failed every single subject. What should I do?" "You failed," Ralph said speechlessly. "Then let's make a bet on your final exam results. If you pass them all, you lose, and you'll do whatever I ask. Conversely, if you fail even one subject, I lose, and I'll be your slave for a week. How about that?" "Fair enough." Hermione bit her lip, thought for a long time, and finally shook her head, saying, "I won't bet with you. I've thought about it, and I think I did alright." "Not bad." Ralph laughed in exasperation at this extremely Versailles-esque statement. "Hermione, you'd better really say not bad, if you're first in your grade again when the results come out, instead of failing every subject. Just you wait and see." Hermione made a face at Ralph, then darted behind the girl with the ponytail, hooking her arm around hers and playfully teasingly saying, "Shirley, look, he's threatening me. Let's both take him down together." Shirley smiled sweetly and asked softly, "Ralph, how did you do on your divination test?" "A perfect score, of course. I actually have some talent for divination," Ralph boasted. He then recounted what happened in the divination classroom and mentioned a prophecy left by Cassandra. Shirley pondered for a moment, then asked doubtfully, "I don't understand the first sentence. When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. Does the sun rise in the west?" "On Venus, the sun rises in the west," Hermione, the know-it-all, explained. "But on Earth, if you fly from east to west in a high-latitude region, and the plane's speed is faster than the Earth's rotational speed, you can briefly see the sun rise in the west." "Your explanation is too unmagical." Ralph shook his head. "Cassandra was a wizard from 1,000 years ago. How could she know these things?" "Then I don't know." Hermione frowned. "The dead will be resurrected, and the old ones will return." "Does that mean the Dark Lord will be resurrected?" Ralph thought of Helena. If he resurrected Helena according to Cassandra's prophecy, that would also be considered a resurrection of the dead. As for the old ones, Grindelwald is also an old one, isn't he? Lions and snakes, eagles and badgers, all can be trusted. "But didn't you say Slytherin killed Ravenclaw?" Sherry asked softly. That's what I find strange too," Ralph sighed softly. "Slytherin killing Ravenclaw? How could that be believable? Not to mention, the basilisk was most likely his Horcrux. Could that mean the four houses united can be trusted?" Hermione guessed. "That seems to make sense," Ralph pondered. He had never thought of it from this angle before, but the perspective suddenly broadened. The three discussed for a while but couldn't reach a convincing conclusion, so they abandoned the topic and continued to enjoy their leisure time after the exams. On the last day before the holidays, the students' grades came out. Hermione, who kept saying she failed, was indeed first again. Even Sherry, who was second, had a much lower total score than Hermione. Hermione's Versailles-like behavior was indeed infuriating. Ralph's grades dropped significantly. Of course, this wasn't his fault, it was Snape's fault. Who told him to give Ralph such a low score? Snape at least had some decency and didn't give a 0, but this could also be the result of Dumbledore's intervention. However, none of that mattered. Hufflepuff House entered into celebratory mode to celebrate their third consecutive House Cup victory. This time, their triumph was largely due to Hufflepuff's Quidditch Cup win, which significantly boosted their score. At the final banquet, the Great Hall was decorated with Hufflepuff's black and gold curtains, and a leaping honey badger appeared on the magical ceiling. As the banquet drew to a close, Dumbledore stood up, looked at all the students, and smiled. "Another year has ended, and this year is destined to be extraordinary. There have been no deaths at Hogwarts, and all the teachers and students are seated here, exactly as they are. Let us raise our glasses and celebrate this wonderful moment." Everyone roared with laughter, clapping enthusiastically, and then raised their glasses. After everyone quieted down, Dumbledore continued, "Of course, there is also something regrettable. Professor Black has submitted his resignation. Although I am very reluctant to part with him, I have to accept his request for his safety. There's no need to be sad." Dumbledore smiled. "Parting is for a better reunion. Let us raise our glasses again and toast Professor Black." Sirius Black stood up, bowed slightly to everyone, then raised his glass and drank it all in one gulp. The Great Hall erupted in cheers again. Many students were surprised by this sudden news. "I wonder who the school will assign to teach defense against the dark arts next semester," Neville said sullenly. "Maybe a werewolf," Macmillan joked. Ralph's eyes flickered. He suddenly remembered Barty Crouch Jr. in the original timeline. Peter Pettigrew encountered Bertha Jorkins, who was visiting relatives in Albania, and brought her to the Dark Lord's side. Under Voldemort's brutal torture, they finally learned from Bertha that Barty Crouch Jr. was still alive. This was an extremely coincidental event. But now Peter is dead. Voldemort couldn't possibly know about Barty Crouch Jr., so Barty shouldn't be able to come to Hogwarts, right? Would they finally have a peaceful semester in the second half of the year? The next day, all the students boarded the Hogwarts Express, heading to King's Cross Station. Sitting in the carriage, Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione were chatting about their summer plans. "Ralph, what about you? Are you going back to America this year?" Hermione asked. "No," Ralph shook his head. "I'm going to Austria with Dumbledore this summer to see an old friend." Ralph didn't know who the old friend was, but Dumbledore seemed very excited, like he was going on a blind date. "How long will it take to get back?" Sherry asked softly. "I'm not too sure about that either," Ralph shook his head. "But I'll definitely be able to make it to the Quidditch World Cup. You guys want to come too?" Ralph invited. "I'll ask Fudge for some tickets later." "Yes," Hermione nodded excitedly. "My parents are both very interested in Quidditch. They should be willing to go see the game. I have to go back to the convent first," Sherry said, frowning. "But it might be difficult to get out this summer." "Why?" Hermione asked. "The summers before last and last year, I sneaked out," Sherry sighed softly. "This year, the nuns will definitely keep a close eye on me and won't let me get away alone. Magic is forbidden outside of school, and if Sherry is strictly watched, even her room at night will be locked, making it very difficult for her to leave the convent." "It's okay, I'll come to your convent to pick you up myself when I get back from Austria," Ralph blinked. "Give me your address." "You're going to the convent?" Sherry's eyes widened. "What?" Ralph rubbed the back of his head, leaned back in his chair, and chuckled. "Don't you welcome me to visit the place where you grew up?" "No, it's just," Shirley bit her lip. She quickly pulled out a quill, took the boy's hand, and swiftly wrote an address in his palm. The girl with the ponytail raised her bright, beautiful face, looked at Ralph, smiled sweetly, and said expectantly, "Ralph, I'll be waiting for you." Granger's Time Turner Volume, and Chapter 442. Ralph, Bella, I give you my regards on Tom's behalf. July, North Sea. A summer storm raged, bringing torrential rain and whipping up waves that ravaged the vast ocean. Two black carriages streaked across the sky from the storm clouds, hurtling towards the center of the North Sea. They swayed precariously in the gale, like small boats adrift on the sea. Inside, a blond boy reading the Daily Prophet was being jostled around uncomfortably. He put the newspaper away and looked out through the glass. Thick gray clouds hung low over the sea. Though it was morning, the sky was as black as night. Spiderweb-like lightning ripped through the sky, dancing on the sea with dazzling light. In the glare, Ralph could see a small island in the distance. On the island stood a triangular fortress, built of dark rock, looking sinister and terrifying, like a haunted place. It was both a lair of dementors and a wizarding prison, called Azkaban. The Thestrals descended slowly from the sky, their wheels skimming across the water, creating huge splashes, before finally coming to rest on a large, protruding rock. Ralph jumped down and gazed closely at this advanced training course, accessible only to a select few wizards. Its outer walls were 100 meters high, devoid of windows or openings, the massive stones intricately interlocking, perfectly rounded. Soon, another wizard emerged from the carriage. He was short and stout, wearing a striped robe and a long black cloak, his gray hair neatly styled. "Oh, Merlin," Fudge said, his feet sinking into the solid ground, the motion sickness finally subsiding somewhat. "The weather's terrible, isn't it?" Ralph, yes, Mr. Fudge. Ralph turned and smiled. Thank you for coming to Azkaban with me in this weather. Actually, I could have just come with the Aurors. You have a grudge against the Dementor Lord, and I didn't feel comfortable letting you come alone. Fudge opened an umbrella and shielded Ralph from the rain, only then realizing that not a single drop of rain had fallen on the boy's head. Ralph smiled apologetically. Thank you so much, it's not entirely because of you. Fudge glanced around and lowered his voice. 2 Dementors have gone missing from Azkaban, and I came here today specifically to find the Dementor Lord and ask about it. Ralph said in surprise in a low voice. 2 Dementors have gone missing from Azkaban. He wasn't acting, he was genuinely shocked. After all, Sherry and Hermione had only captured 1 Dementor, so how could 2 have gone missing? Ralph had previously captured a Dementor as teaching material for Sirius Black's Patronus charm, but he had already returned it to the Ministry of Magic. 1 Dementor was guarding the secret passage from Honeydukes to Hogwarts, but it suddenly disappeared. I suspect it might have entered Hogwarts. Fudge sighed heavily, his face full of worry. There's another Dementor that went missing near Hogsmeade. Ralph thought carefully, this matter shouldn't be related to him. Just then, another carriage alighted, and 3 Aurors escorted a wizard out. Ralph looked at the prisoner with a broad, rugged face and asked curiously, Minister Fudge, what crime did he commit? Illegally keeping rare magical creatures. Fudge's gaze flickered almost imperceptibly at the box in the boy's hand, and he whispered, in this guy's yard, we found a half-grown Welsh green dragon, a hog, and 2 venomous leopards. He'll be in prison for life in Azkaban, just that few creatures. And he's already sentenced to life imprisonment? Ralph gripped his black case tightly, his face radiating righteous indignation. These thieves definitely deserve to be arrested. Let's go into Azkaban first. Fudge walked forward, Ralph following closely behind, along a stone-paved path, through a stone gate, and into the prison. The entrance was a spacious hall, yet it felt dark and damp, filled with a strange smell that Ralph couldn't quite place. But he quickly understood what that smell was. A group of creatures appeared in the corridor, about 3 meters tall, wearing black hooded cloaks, their bodies gray, looking like rotting corpses. They slid across the floor, their hands, gray, thin, and scabbed, gleaming from their cloaks, dragging behind them the corpses of wizards. Ralph held his breath, his face grim. So that was the smell of death. They passed through a winding staircase and arrived at the first level of the prison, where wizards with minor offenses were held. Ralph, you've been arrested too, a familiar voice suddenly rang in Ralph's ears. The boy turned his head and saw a short, stout man with a stubble beard and wearing a tattered coat staring at him. It's me, don't you recognize me? The short, stout man brushed aside his long, messy ginger yellow hair, revealing a swollen, bloodshot old face. Ralph looked closely for a moment, then exclaimed in surprise, Mundungus Fletcher, what are you doing here? 2 years ago, at Christmas, Ralph had traveled to Albania on the Orient Express and met Mundungus on the way. At the time, he was with a Weasley family, heading to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary. 2 years had passed, and he never expected to meet him again in Azkaban. Ralph, is this someone you know? Fudge walked over, putting his arm around the boy's shoulder. He stared at Mundungus and said with disgust, oh, this guy. I remember he's smuggling poison tentacle seeds, which are Class C prohibited items. That's pure slander. Mundungus blushed and protested, Minister, I picked them up. I thought nobody wanted them. I didn't smuggle them. You managed to find a whole sack of poison tentacle seeds, huh? Fudge scoffed. You'd better stay put. You'll be out in 2 weeks. Ralph shrugged helplessly at Mundungus and continued walking. Ralph, I'm going to talk to the Dementor leader. Fudge pointed to the tall, dark-skinned wizard beside him and whispered, Kingsley is going to escort prisoners to the cells. He wants you to go to the bottom. After you've seen that lake, come back quickly, understand? Ralph nodded, said goodbye to Fudge, and followed Kingsley Shackleton down the stairs. Azkaban imprisoned its prisoners according to their crimes. Those like Mundungus, who were only held for a few months, were on the first level. The lower you went, the heavier the crime. The lowest-ranking criminals faced life imprisonment, the kind where even 10 minutes of Avada Kedavra torture felt too lenient. Kingsley led the prisoner to the lowest level, forcing him through a low door into a long, dark corridor. Finally, he stopped in an empty room and led the prisoner inside. Ralph stood not far away, quietly waiting for Kingsley to emerge so he could look at the lake where the Dementors had been born. At that moment, In the opposite cell, a woman staggered to her feet, her face pressed against the iron bars, and she rasped, "Hey, kid." Ralph heard the noise and turned to see a filthy witch. She had thick lips, heavy eyelids, and thick, long eyelashes. She was very thin, her bones covered by skin, and her haggard face stared with two mad, black eyes. One could vaguely discern that she had once been beautiful, but the prolonged torment had left her face haggard and emaciated. "You called me," Ralph pointed to himself. "Yes." The woman's lips twisted into a forced smile, but her eyes were cold and hard as stone. "Child, come here. I'll ask you some questions, and if you answer, Auntie will give you a reward." "My grandfather said I shouldn't talk to strangers." Ralph opened his innocent eyes, a look of fear on his face, and weakly asked, "Excuse me, big sister, what's your name?" "My name is Bellatrix." The woman seemed to see a little white rabbit. Her twisted lips revealed yellow teeth as she said, "Didn't your grandfather tell you to be helpful? Child, come here quickly. I'll just ask you some questions. I won't hurt you." "All right then, big sister." Ralph gave a harmless smile and walked towards the woman. When he was just a step away, Bellatrix suddenly reached out and grabbed at Ralph's clothes. The boy abruptly stepped back, chuckling, "Almost there, big sister, you little rascal." Bellatrix's eyes widened suddenly. Ralph stepped forward and grabbed Bellatrix by the neck. "Bellatrix Lestrange, right?" The boy nodded elegantly, smiling slightly. "I give you my regards on behalf of Tom Riddle." Chapter 443 The Birth of the Dementors. Tom Riddle, though it was the Dark Lord's former name, he abandoned it half a century ago, adopting the name Voldemort. Therefore, few knew him. But as the Dark Lord's most fervent follower, Bellatrix certainly did. She glared with her crazed black eyes at the boy before her, who looked no more than 13 or 14, and demanded, "Who are you?" Ralph smiled brightly and said, "I share the same name as Voldemort, Tom. Of course, you can also call me Master." "I can accept that. You dare call yourself that?" Bellatrix roared in fury. She opened her mouth, which hadn't been brushed in over a decade, and spat out a mouthful of foul-smelling saliva. But the saliva didn't land on the boy. Instead, it flew halfway, then suddenly returned along its original path, striking Bellatrix's own filthy face. Ralph chuckled, a smug look on his face, and said, "So eager to die?" The boy gripped Bellatrix's neck, his fingers tightening, and lifted her up, sending her tumbling into the air. Her feet, already off the ground, trembled violently, her hands futilely flailing against his powerful arm, her face turning from red to purple. Just as Bellatrix was about to suffocate, Ralph released her, and the woman crashed to the ground, gasping for breath. She retreated to a corner of the cell, away from the boy. Bellatrix bit her lip hard, blood seeping from it, and snarled, "Don't let me out, or I'll kill you all." Suddenly, Ralph's arm stretched out several meters like rubber, his hand passing through the iron bars, reaching in front of Bellatrix, and slapping her hard across the face. The woman's cheek immediately swelled up. "If you dare say another word," Ralph sneered, "I'll give you another slap." Bellatrix had never been slapped before, and the humiliation was overwhelming. Her eyes bulged with a sickly bloodshot. "The Dark Lord will come to save me, and then, all of you will die." Ralph slapped her again, this time turning both cheeks equally red. The boy withdrew the arm he had created using the bird serpent magic, narrowed his cold eyes, and sneered, "The only reason I haven't killed you is because someone is waiting outside for revenge. Bellatrix, you'd better live well, and don't die in Azkaban." Ralph turned and walked towards Kingsley, who had already left his cell and was waiting quietly a short distance away. Kingsley didn't speak, but quietly led the boy away from that level of the prison. Of course, he wouldn't stop Ralph from teaching Bellatrix a lesson. After all, many Aurors he knew had died at the hands of these Death Eaters. He hated them even more. Bellatrix lay on the ground, staring intently at the boy's figure, as if trying to memorize him. After leaving the lowest level of the prison, Ralph followed Kingsley into a steep, rugged stone path. Most of it was naturally formed, but there were occasional carved steps that made climbing easier. All around were steep stone walls eroded by wind and rain over thousands of years. In some places, the rocks had taken on strange and wonderful shapes. After walking for a long time, the tunnel suddenly widened, revealing a forest of towering pines and cypresses, the ground covered with a layer of fallen needles and dotted with pine cones. At the entrance stood two Dementors as guards. Kingsley spoke with them briefly, and after receiving permission, led Ralph into the forest. The two walked through the green shadows, parting countless outstretched branches. Even the air seemed grayish-green, utterly silent. At the edge of the forest, a lake appeared, its water crystal clear, like a mirror, radiating a hazy, soft light. Ralph stood by the lake, cupping his hands in his hands. He found the water warm, like hot tears, yet without saltiness. It tasted of earth, plants, and life. This was the lake where Dementors were born. Ralph had heard Newt mention it, and thus, he was very curious, which was why he had asked Fudge for permission to investigate. Just then, a whirlpool suddenly appeared in the center of the lake, with faintly visible, extremely tiny specks of light, like a swirling galaxy. With a gurgling sound, bubbles rose from the whirlpool, and then a tall, imposing creature suddenly emerged. The creature looked exactly like the wizard, but was a towering 3 meters tall. Its appearance was so strikingly beautiful that Ralph couldn't immediately determine its gender. The creature's hair was adorned with silver and deep gold, and its skin was translucent and radiant, like a jewel. It wore a long robe inscribed with countless characters, the characters flowing like golden rivers, exuding an aura of holiness. From afar, it appeared bathed in light, like a god. But this illusion lasted only a few seconds. Once removed from the water and exposed to the air, it visibly decayed and rotted. Its handsome face became covered in uneven, pitted bumps, its eye sockets emptied, a large hole appeared in its mouth, and its arms were covered in gray scabs. It transformed into the Dementor Ralph knew so well. The whole process resembled those perfectly preserved 1,000-year-old corpses in tombs, rapidly oxidizing upon contact with fresh air. The newly born Dementor, sensing the scent of joy, hid its face beneath its equally decaying cloak before lunging at Ralph and Kingsley. Kingsley raised his wand, aimed at the Dementor, and shouted, "Palm tops of exile!" A silver lynx emerged from the tip of the wand, landing lightly behind it and charging towards the Dementor. "Ralph, don't wander around here. I'll banish it and be right back." Kingsley ran off quickly. Ralph nodded, continuing to squint at the lake, waiting to see if he'd spot a second Dementor. Just then, the boy was drawn to something on the opposite shore. He flew over, and as he drew near, his eyes widened in shock. It was the corpse of a wizard, limbs twisted, body swollen, a soaking wet cloak hanging from a rotting log, and a box tied to the corpse's ankle. Ralph waved his wand, transferring the body to his box, and returned to the shore. When Kingsley returned, Ralph didn't mention the corpse, and they went back downstairs together. Fudge had been waiting in the hall for a while. Seeing Ralph, he breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. "Now that we've seen it, let's hurry back." Ralph looked at the beaming Fudge and asked curiously, "Minister, what happened?" "The Dementor that went missing near Hogsmeade," Fudge said with a broad smile. "It's returned on its own." Chapter 444 The Smuggled Girl. The Dementor, which disappeared around Easter, returning home on its own after several months was indeed unexpected for Ralph. He had assumed the creature had been captured by some magizoologist as research material, perhaps even developing a certain affinity for him. It seemed he had been mistaken. With the Dementor back, of course, he had to ask where it had been. According to it had been chasing Peter Pettigrew on Easter Day, straying into a cave in the Forbidden Forest and getting lost. This explanation seemed plausible, and Fudge could only let it go. The group returned to the Ministry of Magic by carriage. Stepping into the cold, empty hall, Fudge frowned. He beckoned Umbridge closer and asked, "Where's the British Ministry of Magic delegation?" "Minister," Umbridge whispered in Fudge's ear, her voice sweet, "Barty Crouch set off with them half an hour ago. Didn't I say I'd wait until I returned from Azkaban before leaving?" Fudge's voice instantly turned icy, his brows furrowing. "Don't you know Barty Crouch? He never waits for anyone," Umbridge whispered, complaining. "You suspended him for another year and demoted him 2 ranks. It's no wonder he's resentful and disobedient. He's no longer the director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and he still dares to act arrogantly in front of me," Fudge said darkly, narrowing his eyes. "When he comes back from Berlin, demote him 2 more ranks. I'll be grateful he can even be a regular clerk." Standing to the side, Ralph could only pretend not to hear. Barty Crouch and Fudge were longtime political rivals, having competed for the position of Minister of Magic. Last year, using Sirius Black's wrongful conviction as a pretext, Fudge suspended Crouch for a full year. Crouch had only recently returned to the ministry after completing his investigation, and this. Fudge was naturally very unhappy. Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Minister, I'll take the Orient Express to Berlin myself." He was going to Austria with Dumbledore, but before that, Dumbledore needed to go to Berlin, Germany, to attend the International Wizarding Federation General Conference this summer. So, Ralph had to go to Berlin first and wait for Dumbledore's conference to end. Ralph, these are special times. Wizards going to Germany have to undergo strict checks. Fudge glanced at the suitcase in Ralph's hand. He didn't want the boy to be arrested by the German Ministry of Magic and imprisoned in the infamous Erkstower prison as soon as he got off the train. You'd better go to Berlin with a British delegation. That would be much less risky, but hasn't Mr. Crouch already left? Ralph said. Minister, the International Wizarding Federation sent a flying dragon ship, Umbridge interjected. It shouldn't have left British territory yet, so we can use the Flu Network? That's right. Fudge's eyes lit up. Immediately have the Flu Network Authority contact the flying dragon ship and connect to their fireplaces. Since Fudge said so, Ralph didn't insist anymore and just waited quietly. With orders from the Minister of Magic, the Flu Network administration quickly made contact with a spaceship and connected to the Flu Network. After saying goodbye to Fudge, Ralph went to the fireplace, grabbed a pinch of Flu powder, and sprinkled it into the fire. Floating dragon ship, the boy said, and his body soared into the air, as if sucked into a giant socket. A wave of dizziness washing over him. When the swirling green flames disappeared, he found himself in a gilded fireplace. Ralph stepped out of the fireplace, feeling somewhat dizzy, when a young wizard rushed out from the other side of the corridor and bumped into him. Ralph staggered, and looking up, he saw a girl of about 16 or 17, with long black hair tied into a delicate braid with a red and gold ribbon, hanging diagonally over her left shoulder. The girl fell to the ground, cried out in pain, and rubbed her sore bottom. Ralph quickly helped her up and asked, "Are you alright?" Rapid footsteps approached from afar, and 3 wizards in uniform robes came running towards them. The girl's face changed, and she took off running. Ralph, not understanding the situation, didn't bother to stop her. The girl was fast. At the corner, she encountered another house elf. This time, she didn't bump into it, but nimbly dodged to the side, even grabbing a wine glass filled with wine from its tray. Suddenly, Ralph noticed a pink purse lying where the girl had fallen. He bent down to pick it up, and just as he was about to examine it, the 3 pursuing wizards finally caught up with him. They were all wearing identical robes, with a golden floating dragon emblem on their chests, suggesting they were staff members of the floating dragon ship. "Excuse me, sir, did you see which way that witch ran off to?" a tall man asked breathlessly. Ralph didn't hide anything, pointing to the left corridor. "She ran in that direction, thank you." The 2 wizards continued chasing after her, leaving only the tall man, who looked at Ralph and said, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Ralph Scamander?" "Yes, that's me." Ralph nodded. "You recognize me?" "Yes, I've seen your picture in the Daily Prophet." The tall wizard smiled. "My name is Carmel, and I work on this floating dragon ship. The Ministry of Magic just contacted us and learned that you wanted to use the fireplace. Shall I take you to the British delegation's room?" "Thank you, Mr. Carmel." Ralph, carrying his black leather suitcase, followed him forward, curiously asking, "What about that girl?" "This ship is carrying delegations from various countries, heading to Berlin for the International Wizarding Federation," Carmel explained, "but that girl didn't have any Ministry of Magic issued boarding permits. She smuggled herself on board." The 2 walked through the corridor and soon arrived at a huge room, where the wizards sitting inside all looked up at Ralph. The room was filled with officials from the British Ministry of Magic, who naturally recognized the blonde boy. "Mr. Barty Crouch, I've brought Mr. Ralph Scamander," Carmel said, then took his leave. Barty Crouch was a man in his 50s, with a short mustache that looked meticulously trimmed. His robes were spotless, without a single wrinkle, and his shoes were gleaming. Crouch glanced at Ralph and said coldly, "Bertha, take Mr. Scamander to his room." "Yes, Mr. Crouch." A slightly plump witch with curly blonde hair quickly approached, smiling broadly. "Mr. Scamander, this way." Ralph followed her to his room. After Bertha left, he placed a box on the table and took out the pink purse the girl had just dropped. Ralph opened the purse, intending to check for any information, but immediately froze. He turned the wallet over and shook it gently, and a whole bunch of things fell out: bundles of unicorn hair, a large handful of phoenix tail feathers, werewolf fur, river monster spines, yew wood, snake wood, spruce wood, sycamore wood. Chapter 445 The Girl Who Sneaked into the Room. The wallet Ralph found was enlarged considerably using a seamless stretch charm. While not as large as his own suitcase, it was still quite impressive. Most of the wallet's space was filled with the fur of various magical creatures and precious woods, including many prohibited items. No wonder the girl had infiltrated this floating dragon ship. This was a magical ship dispatched by the International Wizarding Federation to pick up representatives from various countries. It wouldn't be subject to strict scrutiny by the German Aurors, making it the best choice for smuggling. Although it was a stowaway's property, Ralph didn't intend to hand it over to the British delegation or the International Wizarding Federation. Instead, he planned to wait for the owner to come to him. If the girl didn't come looking for him by the time they reached Berlin, Ralph would have no choice but to reluctantly accept it. The boy walked around the room, setting up magic in every corner. This was his habit when traveling. His suitcase was too important and had to be handled with care. The room was also quite large, containing a tall wardrobe in addition to an oak bed with brown velvet curtains and carved vines and leaves. Rove pushed open the window, and a gust of wind blew in, causing the curtains to flutter across the rose-colored carpet, casting undulating shadows like a strong wind sweeping across the sea. The boy gazed into the distance. He was now standing 10,000 meters in the air, with a vast sea of clouds below and a sky full of brilliant stars. Under the moonlight, the sea of clouds seemed to be covered with a silver cloak, shimmering and magnificent, a sight to behold and awe-inspiring. He was aboard a floating dragon ship. Floating dragons were enormous magical creatures, the most docile in nature. After special training, they could be used to carry magical structures and serve as a means of transportation for wizards. They were faster than the Orient Express and the Mayflower. Rove stood by the window admiring the night view for a while when there was a knock at the door. He went to open it and saw Bertha Jorkins again. "Mr. Scamander, you've missed dinner time. I've brought you some late-night snacks, thank you so much, please come in." Ralph smiled and said, "You can just call me Ralph." Bertha entered the room, placed the food box on the table, and Ralph poured her a cup of tea. Bertha sat on the sofa, picked up her glass, took a few sips, and said, "Ralph, if you need anything, just let me know, and I'll let the staff know." "Not at the moment, but I'll let you know if I need anything," Ralph replied politely. "Thank you for your concern." Bertha chatted for a while, showing no sign of leaving. She inquired, "Ralph, I heard Sirius Black was a defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts." "Yes, but he's resigned." Ralph paused, then asked, "Do you know Professor Black?" "Yes." Bertha immediately launched into a long explanation of Sirius. "Back when I was at Hogwarts, I was a few years ahead of him. He was handsome and from the Black family, very popular. Many witches liked him, but he rejected them all. I even observed him for a while and noticed his relationship with James Potter was unusual." "Unusual?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Yet, they were always inseparable, practically inseparable. I even thought they were a couple." Bertha sighed. "It's such a shame Potter ended up with Evans." "Bertha, shipping every couple will only hurt you." Bertha, like a chatterbox, kept rambling on about the past, but sometimes she would stumble, as if the time had been too long and she couldn't remember. Ralph knew this was the consequence of Barty Crouch's actions. He had cast a powerful forgetting spell on her, causing permanent damage to her memory, making her forgetful. The Crouch father and son were truly wicked. "Ralph, is there something important going to Berlin?" "Nothing important," Ralph said vaguely. "I'm going to Berlin to visit a friend of my grandfather's, and this ship just happens to be going that way." "Me too," Bertha blurted out. "I've taken my annual leave to go on vacation to Albania, and this floating dragon ship will pick up the Albanian representative." Mentioning Albania reminded Ralph of Voldemort. He wondered where Tom was now. However, with Peter Pettigrew dead, Bertha's trip to Albania should be safe. At least she wouldn't be captured by Peter and handed over to Voldemort again. As the boy pondered, Bertha whispered, "Ralph, Mr. Crouch didn't leave without you. He wasn't doing it on purpose. Please don't be angry. Mr. Crouch has always been like this, meticulous in his work, strict with others, and strict with himself. Why would I be angry about something like this?" Ralph smiled, asking casually, "Are you and Mr. Crouch close?" "Yes, I worked for a while in the International Department of Magical Cooperation, when Mr. Crouch was the director," Bertha quickly added. "However, because of Sirius Black's case, he was suspended for a year and demoted 2 ranks. Now he's just the deputy director of the International Office of Magical Law." "That's right." Although Crouch had wrongly accused Sirius, causing a shocking miscarriage of justice in Britain, he only received a 1-year suspension and a 2-rank demotion. There was no way he'd be sent to Azkaban or dismissed for something like this. It's said that wrongful convictions are subject to lifelong accountability, but at most, it only goes as far as compensation from the Ministry of Magic. They can't really pursue it to the death. However, Crouch's position as Deputy Director of the International Office of Magical Law won't last much longer. Rove plans to return to England and arrest Barty Crouch Jr. He doesn't believe that helping his Death Eater's son escape Azkaban, such a shocking scandal, isn't enough to earn Crouch a one-way ticket to Azkaban. Bertha chatted for a while longer before finally leaving the room. After Rove finished his late-night snack, he washed up and went to bed. In the stillness of the night, wisps of white smoke suddenly seeped into the room through the crack in the door. A moment later, the door creaked open softly, and a girl with braided pigtails tiptoed into the room, turning and gently closing the door behind her. She turned on the light and looked towards the large bed. The boy was already fast asleep, emitting soft snores. The girl's eyes brightened, and she smiled smugly. She waved her wand and said, "Wallet, fly." The wallet didn't fly. Instead, the boy's head began to twitch. The girl leaned closer to look and discovered her wallet was firmly pressed under her pillow. She took off her shoes, jumped onto the soft, large bed that could comfortably sleep 4 or 5 people, and was about to move his head when a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. Looking at the boy's handsome face, a wicked thought suddenly struck her. She wanted to draw a wicked mark on this despicable little thief's face, and right I was here, he'd be terrified when he woke up tomorrow morning. The girl sat cross-legged beside the boy, took out a quill from her pocket, and was about to write when the boy suddenly opened his eyes, their gazes meeting. The girl's expression changed drastically. She reached for her wand, but Ralph grabbed her slender ankle and yanked her down hard, flipping her onto the bed. The girl fell onto the soft bed and immediately kicked at Ralph's face with her feet, which were being held. Ralph dodged the delicate feet, continued to hold the girl's ankles, twisted his arms, and spun her around on the bed. The girl, unable to express her suffering, finally grabbed her wand. She straightened her upper body and raised the wand, only to see 4 vines shoot out and bind her hands and feet. The vines then wrapped around the 4 bedposts, instantly contracting and stretching the girl's limbs out into a T-shape. Ralph straddled the girl's waist, picked up the quill pen, tapped the girl's forehead, and laughed. "What were you trying to write? Tell me. I'll write it for you." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446 The Master of the Staff. The girl lay on the soft bed, struggling desperately, but the vines tied to the bedposts had firmly bound her wrists and ankles, rendering her immobile. Ralph straddled the girl's waist, took a quill pen, wrote the character, "early," on her forehead, and then drew a sniffling animal on her smooth cheek. Unable to resist Ralph's wicked behavior, the girl could only scream, "No, stop, don't touch my face, wah!" Ralph quickly covered the girl's mouth, lowering his voice, "Don't scream so loudly, do you want to attract everyone on the ship?" The girl blinked hard, and Ralph removed his hand. She immediately whispered, "Let me go, and I won't scream." Ralph lifted her delicate chin with his wand, chuckling, "Let you go, and then you can attack me again. My wand is in your hand, what are you afraid of?" The girl said softly and timidly, "If you're worried, just loosen the vines on my arms a little, let me move around, you've bound me numb." Ralph laughed, "My grandfather once told me something, do you know what it was? It can't be that the prettier the woman, the more likely she is to lie, can it?" The girl blinked. Ralph rolled his eyes. "Never try to do what the enemy wants you to do, even the most trivial request. Like asking you to move your arm." Ignoring the girl's pitiful appearance, Ralph roughly groped her right hand. The girl yelled, "What are you doing, you pervert? Don't touch me like that." The girl suddenly stopped yelling because Ralph had touched a button. He pressed it lightly, and a brand new wand popped out of his sleeve. "There must be a wand hidden in your left sleeve too, right?" Ralph sneered. "If I really let go of your arm, you might just capsize in a ditch." The girl was speechless. This kid looked young, but how come his experience in the magical world was more extensive than hers? Damn it. She could only sigh softly. "I'm such a good person." A good person? A good person would, Ralph wanted to say smuggling and carrying contraband, but then he thought about it. He often did those two things with Newt, wouldn't that be insulting him? He immediately changed his tune, saying, "Would a good person sneak into someone's room in the middle of the night, and even try to knock them out with a nebulized sleeping potion? You stole my wallet." The girl gritted her teeth. "I just came to get my own things back, I didn't steal it." "You dropped it on the floor and I picked it up," Rove frowned. "You're not a British wizard, you're a German wizard." "How did you know?" the girl asked, her face filled with shock. "I've been to Germany, lived in the Black Forest for a while, and met some wizards. Their English has the same accent as yours. They like to pronounce W as a lip-biting V, Th as a T, and R as a German uvular R." Listening to the boy's confident explanation, the girl paused, then said, "Do I have an accent? I didn't even notice. I always thought I spoke with a perfect London accent." Rove's roommate in his previous life was the same. He clearly had a strong northeastern accent, but insisted he spoke Mandarin. "A German wizard comes to England to smuggle goods, huh? I didn't expect you to be involved in international trade." "I'm not a smuggler." The girl lying on the bed glared fiercely at the boy straddling her, introducing herself. "I'm a master of making wands." Ralph leaned back slightly. He finally understood why people looked at him with surprise when he said he was a magizoologist. He was now looking at the young girl, who, despite her young age, spoke with a similar gaze. "Do you have anything to prove your identity?" "In my back pocket, there's a wallet, and inside is my—" The girl paused, blushing slightly, and said awkwardly, "expulsion certificate." This time, Ralph was truly scrutinizing the girl. Looking at her, he inexplicably felt a sense of déjà vu, as if she were another version of him. "What's wrong? Were you expelled from school too?" "How could that be? I always follow the school rules." Ralph coughed, then reached out and began groping the girl's buttocks again. "Where are you touching? Who told you to put your wallet there?" Ralph groped around for a while before finally finding his wallet. He opened it and indeed found an expulsion notice. "Dear Miss Karen Grigovich, we received a report that you have again illegally sold wands. This behavior is a serious violation of Durmstrang's school rules, therefore you have been expelled from Durmstrang. We hope you take good care of yourself." "Your great headmaster, Karkaroff, selling wands can get you expelled?" Ralph asked curiously. "The students who sold them were a bit special," Karen explained awkwardly. "They were using dark magic in combat, their wands were confiscated, and they were on probation. I sold the wand, and they continued their duel, and after being discovered, I was expelled." Ralph glanced at the letter again. "Karen Grigovich, what is your relationship with Mr. Grigovich, one of the 3 greatest wand makers in Europe?" "He's my grandfather," Karen said with a rather smug smile. "He's the greatest wand master of this century, Mr. Ollivander might not agree with you." Ralph shrugged. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Rove shushed her, saying, "Don't say a word. You're an illegal immigrant. If you're discovered, you'll definitely be arrested." Karen nodded. Rove jumped off the girl, pulled the blanket over her, and covered her completely. After adjusting himself, Rove opened the door. Bertha, wearing only her pajamas, stood in the doorway. She looked into the room and asked curiously, "Rove, what happened here? I think I just heard some shouting, something like 'No, be gentle, get it on my face.'" Bertha lived next door to Rove and naturally heard some of Karen's shouts, but the keywords she chose were rather tricky. Rove yawned and said, "It must have been me talking in my sleep. I just had a nightmare." "Sorry, Bertha, I disturbed your sleep." Bertha was a little confused. She clearly heard a woman's voice. She muttered to herself, but didn't say anything and simply left. Ralph closed the door and re-entered the bedroom, finding Karen freed from the vines, a wand in her hand. No wonder he was a wand maker, he had wands hidden everywhere. "You still want to fight me?" Ralph beckoned, laughing. "I won't hold back like before. If I tie you up again, you'll be hanging upside down from the ceiling." Karen rubbed her sore arms, admitting defeat. "I won't fight anymore. I'm no match for you. It was just a misunderstanding. There's no need for a fight." "That's right." Ralph tossed the 2 wallets to Karen, saying, "Here's your stuff back. I won't report you. You can go now, I'm going to sleep." Karen happily took the wallets, her eyes darting around before she plopped down on the edge of the bed, swinging her legs. "Don't be in such a hurry to get rid of me." "What, you want to sleep here?" Ralph asked with a half-smile. Karen touched the soft bed, smiling. "It's not impossible." Chapter 447 The special deal between Ralph and Karen. When Karen was tied to the bed, all she could think about was escaping. Now that she was free and realized she was safe, She suddenly changed her tune and decided not to leave. Rolf glanced at the clock on the wall and saw it was almost 1 a.m. He urged, "Hurry up and go. If you don't leave now, I'll really call people to arrest you. Then you won't be able to leave even if you want to." "Okay, hurry up and call people," Karen said, sitting on the bed, swinging her legs. "When everyone comes, I'll tell them you secretly drugged me, kidnapped me to your room, tied me to the bed, and wrote insulting words on my face." Karen looked up, pointed to her forehead, and said, "Look, it's still there, so a single word like early is insulting. I didn't write a tally mark or RBQ." Seeing the boy remain silent, the girl pressed her advantage, saying, "Rolf Scamander. I've read the Daily Prophet and know you're quite famous in England. You wouldn't want everyone to know that the renowned Scamander did those disgraceful things to the granddaughter of the famous Wandmaster Grigorovich, would you?" "Thank you for reminding me." Rolf walked towards Karen, chuckling. "I'll give you a potion made with the venom of a winged demon right away. It'll make you forget the past. It's very effective. That way, you won't remember what I did to you, and you certainly won't tell anyone. Come on, try it." Karen looked at the smiling boy and tensed up again. She said tautly, "Don't do anything reckless. This is illegal. You're still young. You mustn't go down the path of crime. I told you to leave earlier, but you wouldn't. Now you're scared." Rolf crossed his arms, leaning against the wardrobe, and said irritably, "What do you want? Can't you just say it?" The girl's eyes were resentful as she said, "I want to go back to Berlin. Isn't Berlin the final destination of this flight? But I'm a stowaway." Karen sighed. "This ship will also go to France, Spain, Italy, to pick up representatives from various countries. It won't arrive in Berlin for some time. I'm a stowaway, with no place to stay, no food, and I have to hide from the wizard stationed on the ship. I was discovered today and almost caught." The girl tilted her head to look at the boy, her brows full of expectation and pleading. "Since we're going the same way, could you help me? I can hide here with you for a few days." Rolf hesitated for a moment and said, "What benefit would I get from helping you at such a risk?" Karen, who had been feeling uneasy, smiled and said, "I can make you wands. I learned from my grandfather, and my craftsmanship is excellent. If you carry several wands, you can have another one if your wand is disarmed in battle, just like I did. You want me to help you for less than 10 galleons a wand?" Rolf rolled his eyes at the girl, then snapped his fingers, causing the vines on the bedposts to flank like tentacle monsters. "Besides, do you think I need to carry so many wands?" Karen's smile vanished. She sighed, "I hate wizards like you who can cast spells without a wand." "You've ruined the wand business," Rolf asked with a grin. "Do you have any other valuable things? You can trade them with me." Karen stared at Rolf. "What do you want?" Rolf scrutinized the girl, who quickly covered herself with her arms, warning, "Don't go too far. Give me all the magical materials in your purse, and I'll help you." "I knew you were still after my purse." Karen snorted coldly, "You wretched little thief, but aren't those magical materials the most valuable things you carry?" Rolf spread his hands. "I chose to smuggle myself in because of these magical materials." Karen glared at the boy. "I gave them all to you. Couldn't I just take the train back to Berlin? Why did I have to smuggle myself in?" "Oh, right." Ralph felt he was indeed being a bit greedy, so he conceded a large step. "Then let's split it 70-30. I'll take 70, you take 30, the girl quickly said. "I risked my life to collect these. When I was plucking hairs from the big-headed monster, I even got kicked and spent several days at St. Mungo's magical hospital. You didn't do anything, just took me in. It was a small favor, so giving you 3% is more than enough." Ralph smiled and looked at her. The girl narrowed her eyes. "At most 40-60. Don't push your luck. Knowing when to stop is a good habit." Ralph chuckled. "Let's split it 30-70. You get 70%, I get 30%. Let's all make money peacefully." Karen looked warily at the suddenly agreeable boy, frowning. "You'd better explain yourself clearly. If you keep this up, I'm getting anxious." Ralph hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Do you know Erkstadt prison?" "Yes, it's the German Ministry of Magic's prison for serious criminals." Karen frowned. "Why are you asking?" "I want to go in," Ralph said calmly. When you get to Berlin, go to the Ministry of Magic's gate, say you're a member of the sorcerer party. Long live Grindelwald, and you'll probably get in," Karen said. "Not that kind of in, just visiting someone in prison," Ralph said speechlessly. "I don't know anyone in Germany. I need a local like you to show me the way." "You're not planning a prison break, are you?" Karin suddenly became excited. I'm law-abiding, how could I do something like that? Rove rolled his eyes at the girl. It really is just a prison visit. Karin hesitated for a moment, then, thinking there seemed to be no danger, nodded and said, deal. Rove smiled with satisfaction. I guarantee I'll get you safely to Berlin. Is there anything to eat? Karin rubbed her stomach pitifully. I haven't eaten anything all night. I'm starving. Rove stood up, opened his suitcase, and took out a bag of snacks Sherry had prepared for him. The girl grabbed the pastry, popped it into her mouth, and her eyes lit up. What's this called? Pineapple preserves, Rove said. A type of pineapple sold at the Honeyduck's candy shop in Hogsmeade. It tastes so good. Karin wolfed it down. Rove opened the cupboard, took out a quilt and blanket, threw them on the bed, and asked, so, where are you sleeping tonight? Karin picked up a chocolate caddy and then looked at the large bed. This bed is mine, don't even think about it. You expect me to sleep on the sofa or the floor? Karin smirked. Wrong. Ralph pointed to the bathroom in the distance and laughed. You'll sleep in the bathtub. I'll lock the bathroom door with magic later, so you'd better not come near me tonight, or I might kill you in my dreams. Chapter 448 Shadow Clone? Although Ralph had reached a verbal agreement with Karin, he wasn't really familiar with her and couldn't possibly let her sleep on the sofa or the floor nearby. After all, how could he allow someone else to snore beside him? What if Karin had bad intentions in the middle of the night and tried to climb into his bed to do something to Ralph? He wouldn't even have time to react. The bathroom was different. There was a door and a wall for cover. Ralph could set up defensive magic, so if she wanted to come out, he would be woken up. It was perfect. However, in the latter half of the night, Ralph regretted letting the girl sleep in the bathtub. It wasn't out of pity, but because he needed to use the toilet, but there was nowhere to go. Ralph couldn't very well wake Karin up, make her get up, take care of his personal needs, and then let her go back to sleep, could he? That would be too unfair. The boy held it in for a long time and could only relieve himself in the toilet in his box. In the morning, he also finished washing up in his box, did some summer homework at the table, and finally heard the toilet door open. Karin walked out with her neck crooked, looking utterly dejected. Ralph glanced at her and said, stiff neck, of course. Karin rubbed her sore neck, complaining, try sleeping in the bathtub for a night. Do you still get a stiff neck? You can turn the bathtub into a bed, Ralph said, tidying up the parchment as he retorted, are you a witch or something? Karin was speechless. She always prided herself on her intelligence, but she hadn't thought of that. Ralph opened the window, revealing a sky ablaze with a brilliant red of dawn. He stretched and said, I'm going to the dining room for breakfast. Are you going to stay here and wait for me to bring you some, or are you coming with me? Karin wanted to go with him, but hesitated, then sighed honestly, my disappearance charm isn't very good. If I encounter a powerful wizard, it's easy for them to see through me. It's alright, I have an invisibility cloak here. Ralph tossed a silver robe to Karin, saying, put this on and stay close to me. Don't wander off. This invisibility cloak was a Christmas gift from Sirius Black to Ralph. He had Sherry sew a few niffler hairs into the lining. In case Karin ran away wearing the cloak, he could find her by her scent. After the girl put on the cloak, Ralph led her out of the room, and when they passed Bertha's room, he called her along as well. The three walked down the corridor towards the dining room. Bertha, noticing Rove still carrying the black leather suitcase, suggested, Rove, if you don't have any valuables, just leave the suitcase in your room. There are wizards from the International Wizarding Association stationed here, so it's quite safe. Rove, of course, couldn't let the suitcase out of his sight. After all, even Karin had managed to smuggle herself in. He didn't believe this place was safe. The boy smiled and, using a pre-prepared excuse, replied, Bertha, I actually have severe autism. I have to take medication every now and then. There's medication in the suitcase. I have to carry it with me at all times. Bertha looked astonished, seemingly finding it hard to believe that the renowned Rove Scamander could have autism. Bertha, who had so much to say, suddenly found herself speechless. Karin, wearing an invisibility cloak and following behind the two, couldn't help but roll her eyes upon hearing Rove's words. Inwardly cursing him for lying without even blushing, how shameless. Last night, he had tied her up and made a deal with her, acting all cunning. Where was the autism? The three quickly entered the dining room, where a considerable number of wizards had already gathered. They were all representatives from various countries, en route to Berlin for the International Confederation of Wizards, ICWA, Congress. While eating breakfast, they read newspapers, occasionally whispering to familiar wizards about current events. This summer, the term of the EWA president would end, requiring a new election. Dumbledore had already served 2 consecutive terms as president, and everyone was discussing whether he would break the record and be re-elected for a third, or whether a new president would emerge. Of course, the upcoming Quidditch World Cup was also a major topic of discussion among the wizards. Held every 4 years, the World Cup was a true celebration and feast for the entire wizarding world, so much so that the EWA meeting had to be held earlier to allow everyone time to watch the games. Ralph sat at the table, listening intently to 2 elderly men discussing the strengths and weaknesses of several seekers, including Crumb. Just then, a piercing scream suddenly rang out from afar. Ralph turned his head and saw a black cat perched on the table, its dark eyes fixed intently on the witch standing before it. "Blackie," a wizard shouted in French, "come here, Blackie, come to me," but the black cat completely ignored its master, its gaze fixed on the witch, its cries terrifying. The witch screamed in terror and recoiled, but the black cat suddenly leaped forward, biting her arm, its sharp teeth tearing a piece of cloth from her sleeve. "You beast, get out of here," the witch's companion shouted, raising his wand. Stun, a red light fell on the black cat, but it wasn't stunned. Instead, under the spell's attack, it split in 2, becoming 2 identical black cats. Separated, they shook their heads, then leaped into the air again, pouncing on the witch. Both woman and cat fell, tumbling and rolling around the dining room, knocking over chairs and the food-laden table. The witch, knocked down, desperately pounded on the cat's mouth with one hand, while her other hand was firmly bitten by another black cat. During the drag, bloody chunks of flesh were torn from her. Unable to escape, she rolled on the ground, screaming shrilly, "Help! Help! Get it away!" This sudden scene undoubtedly terrified many wizards. Karin, hiding in her invisibility cloak, leaned close to Rove and whispered, "That's a spirit cat. Spirit cats are magical creatures unique to France. These animals are very powerful, especially when attacked, as they continuously split into physical clones, making them extremely difficult to deal with." Hearing the witch's screams, people continuously cast spells to attack the spirit cat, but in the explosion of the spell, it had already split into more than a dozen clones, wreaking havoc in the restaurant. Rove watched this scene, and suddenly a ding sounded in his mind. A domesticated spirit cat detected, triggering a side quest. Calm the agitated spirit cat. Reward, split. Each time you are attacked by magic, you can split into physical clones, just like the spirit cat. Each clone only has half the magic power, speed, and strength of the original. The more clones you have, the weaker each clone becomes. Ralph stared at the system's reward. Stunned. This is Shadow Clones. Chapter 449. Karin, the Messenger of Justice. As the spirit cat continued to split and multiply, the entire restaurant was turned into a mess. Karin stared at the rampaging magical creature with burning desire. She had never tried making a wand core from spirit cat 4 before. It was like eating ice cream. She had tried countless flavors, but never had wasabi or garlic. It was definitely lacking in novelty and excitement. The girl was about to sneak over and pluck a few cat hairs when she noticed the boy beside her had already taken to the air and flown towards the center of the restaurant. That was magic that could create physical clones, and Rove certainly didn't want to miss this opportunity. Calming the frenzied spirit cat was actually quite simple. Just grab it by the scruff of its neck, and it would quiet down and be at your mercy. Of course, the prerequisite was finding its original body. The clones of the spirit cat were smaller than the original body, so Rove, flying in midair, quickly found the original body after a quick look around and flew straight towards it. The lynx spotted Ralph in midair. It shook its fur, let out a meowing growl, and commanded its other clones to attack him. They possessed incredible leaping abilities, easily grabbing Ralph as he flew close to the ceiling. Their powerful, poised claws seemed capable of easily pulling the boy down from midair, and many wizards who witnessed this showed expressions of horror and fear. The boy remained unfazed, his arms crossed, his thumbs tapping slightly on his arms. Karin suddenly noticed the cutlery on the table beside her trembling violently. Not only her, but all the wizards in the restaurant noticed this. In an instant, all the metal objects seemed to be manipulated by some magical force, becoming restless and constantly colliding with their surroundings, the clanging sounds echoing throughout the restaurant. 1,000 years ago, Ralph helped the fairy king Legnack remove a tumor, gaining the magical fairy hand, which allowed him to control metallic substances, arbitrarily attracting and altering their forms. With a whoosh, the metal cutlery, plates, bowls, and even the tables and chairs, all controlled by Ralph, flew into the sky. The leaping cat was directly knocked away, crashing into a table laden with food, shattering it with a bang. Before Ralph lay a flat plane, all anyone could see was the handsome young man gracefully landing not far from a cat. The cat released a bitten witch and pounced on him, but the young man dodged the attack at the last second, avoiding a fight and instead swiftly running forward. He reached the witch, bent down, grabbed her collar, pulled her to his chest, and then with an incredibly elegant leap, darted backward. The young man's retreat was extremely fast, covering a considerable distance with the cat in a very short time, bringing the injured witch to safety. The entire rescue was fluid and graceful, a sight to behold. "Bertha, have someone treat her wounds," Ralph said. Bertha hesitated for a moment before stammering, okay, you." Before she could finish, Ralph had already charged forward again, the spirit cat rushing towards him. The next moment, everyone's eyes widened, their hearts pounding, as the young man raised his arm, and an iron plate descended from the sky, instantly blocking the spirit cat's path. It tried to go around to the left, but another iron plate crashed down, blocking its left path as well. The metal that had gathered in the sky all fell, piercing eardrums as it sank into the ground, trapping it in the middle. It finally formed a cage. The spirit cat strained with its hind paws, about to leap out from above, when Ralph had already floated in, stepping on its back. He raised his wand and gently tapped downwards. The spirit cat hissed in pain, its forelegs seemingly broken by an immense weight, instantly bending and collapsing to the ground. Ralph reached out and grabbed its scruff of the neck, lifting it sharply upwards. In an instant, all the clones vanished. The civet let out a few low growls and began to shrink, quickly becoming the size of a Muggle house cat, meowing pitifully. The entire restaurant fell silent. The civet that had just left everyone helpless had been subdued so quickly, the situation had completely reversed in the blink of an eye. Karin stared at Rove in utter shock, her mouth agape. Had he not even used his full strength against her last night? Was she really so easily defeated? Amidst everyone's strange gazes, Rove calmly carried the black cat towards the wounded witch. Her arm wound was deep, almost exposing the bone, and her scalp was bleeding profusely from the tufts of hair that had been roughly pulled out. Carmel, a staff member of the floating dragon ship, was wiping the blood from her body with a soft cloth and using white peony root to stop the bleeding. The civet's owner was standing nearby, apologizing profusely. "I brought Blackie up here to watch the luggage. He's always been gentle, I don't know what's wrong with him today." "It's all my fault." Bertha leaned closer, first looking anxiously at the civet, then asking, "Rolf, are you alright?" "I'm fine." Rolf shook his head, raising his hand to ask, "What do you plan to do with this civet?" "This beast," Carmel said, "should be kept in a cage. We can't let it run around like this anymore. It'll cause a death sooner or later. It absolutely has to be chained up." "What do you think, Mr. Boston?" Boston was the civet's owner, wiping the sweat from his brow. He said, "I completely agree. We'll lock it up right away." "No," the witch, groaning on the ground, said resentfully, "I didn't provoke it at all, yet it bit me. This beast must be killed." "That's right," the witch's companion also said seriously, "we cannot tolerate this beast committing a crime and then going completely unpunished. This is a provocation to the Norwegian Ministry of Magic." Everyone looked at Boston. He hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, "All right, but I don't want it to be tortured." Carmel assured him, "Of course, sir. I will handle it humanely. You don't need to worry." Soon everyone hurriedly left, but Rove frowned and stood there. Karin, wearing an invisibility cloak, stared at the boy and whispered, "Rove, what's wrong?" "Just a little doubtful." Rove narrowed his eyes and said, "Although I've never kept a spirit cat before, I've heard my grandfather mention it. Spirit cats are very intelligent magical creatures. Unless someone attacks them first, they generally won't attack wizards, but that witch didn't attack it first." Karin said, "Many people saw it." "That's exactly what I'm wondering about." Rove nodded. "The French Ministry of Magic even uses spirit cats to guard the ministry, because they, like cats and raccoons, can identify wizards with malicious intent." Karin paused and said, "You suspect that witch is suspicious?" Rove nodded. He was indeed more inclined to trust the judgment of magical creatures. Then let's report her, Karen, suddenly bursting with a sense of justice, said excitedly. What if she really has something going on, plotting something? We're on a ship carrying representatives from various countries. We can't let a problematic wizard stay on board. Ralph was speechless. What's wrong? Karen asked. Did I say something wrong? Before you criticize her, can you look in the mirror first? Ralph rolled his eyes. You yourself are a dangerous element who smuggled yourself in, covered in hair, and you call others monsters. Chapter 450 Ralph, Madam, come at me. Karen, as an illegal immigrant, is not clean herself, yet she still wants to report others. This sense of justice is truly unreasonable. Seeing that the girl was still not giving up, Ralph couldn't help but laugh. How about I report you, the illegal immigrant, first? No, don't do that, we're still working together, Karen said with an embarrassed smile. Besides, I only came here to go home, I have no malicious intent. That guy is different, the spirit cat even attacked her. First of all, just because the spirit cat can detect a wizard with malicious intent doesn't mean that the lady bit had malicious intent. It might really have gone mad. Secondly, Ralph paused slightly, and said in a deep voice, she is a wizard from the Norwegian Ministry of Magic delegation, not an illegal immigrant like you. If you don't have evidence, what right do you have to report her, just because that spirit cat bit her? Making a rash report without any evidence could very well trigger a diplomatic crisis. Alright, Karen pouted. So, where are you going now? To find Carmel, Rove said. He's going to get rid of that spirit cat. I just asked him where it is. Let's go check it out again and see if there's really something wrong with this spirit cat. Hearing the boy's words, Karen immediately cheered up, completely forgetting the bad things he had done to her last night. The two walked along the corridor surrounded by pillars, through the pointed archways, and came to a deep spiral staircase. After descending only 7 or 8 steps, the boy suddenly stopped. Karen was about to speak when Rove covered her mouth, pulled her back against the wall, and hugged her. Seeing the boy give her a look, Karen also shut her mouth and listened intently. She heard sounds coming from far below. It was the sound of boots scraping the ground and faint conversation. Rove cast an illusion charm on himself and looked down again. He saw 2 wizards descending the spiral staircase. His eyesight was excellent, and he quickly recognized the 2 wizards, the witch attacked by the cat and her companion. Their hurried voices echoed up the empty spiral staircase. Sally, listen to me. The wizard grabbed the witch's arm, but she pulled away. Sheila, I've heard you. My mind is made up, don't interfere. Sheila took a few quick steps, blocking her path, and said sternly, Sally, according to the plan, we should leave with the door key. You can't go looking for that thing. That beast attacked me. It will be killed soon, humanely killed, without any pain, Sally growled angrily. Sheila quickly looked up to see if anyone was there. Luckily, there was no wizard. He whispered, so what do you want? I want to take that beast away and torture it slowly. Are you crazy? Sheila said. Where are we? You're causing trouble. That wizard named Carmel won't let you take that spirit cat, then kill him, Lissa sneered. Anyway, we're leaving. He's irrelevant, I won't let you go. The boss said I should take you away. Sheila grabbed Lissa's arm. Let go of me, Sally shouted, pulling a wand from her cloak and slashing it down like a knife. After a flash, Sheila's arm felt like it was on fire, and he quickly released Lissa's arm. Sally, but the woman had already rushed forward. Sheila could only sigh helplessly and follow again, but the two kept a distance. The footsteps faded away completely. Ralph turned to the girl, frowning. They seemed to be speaking German. What were they saying? Karen thought for a moment. They seemed to be going to kill that spirit cat. They also said they were leaving. We were too far away to hear the rest. Leaving? Ralph narrowed his eyes, then pondered. They're Norwegian wizards. Why are they speaking German? I told you she was suspicious, Karen said smugly. Ralph glanced at the girl and beckoned. Come on, follow them. Sally and Sheila quickly reached the bottom of the spiral staircase. Following the signs, they walked through a long corridor to its end. Lissa knocked on the door, and after about 10 seconds, it opened. A man came out and frowned upon seeing her. Ms. Eleanor, what brings you here? You should go back to your room and recover. My injuries are nothing, Sally said with a forced smile. She glanced towards the room and asked curiously, has that beast been killed? Not yet, Carmel replied with a smile. I'm feeding the civet cat right now. After it's full, I'll send it on its way. I'll definitely let you know once I've killed it. Carmel, how about I handle it? Sally reached out and took Carmel's hand, her voice soft and seductive. You don't need to worry about it, no, Miss Eleanor. Carmel pulled his hand back. He refused. I will kill that civet cat. It has already paid for its mistake with its life. Please don't torture it, okay? Looks like the negotiation has failed, Lissa said coldly. Carmel was about to speak when Shirley Swinton suddenly raised her wand, shouting, "Faint!" The spell struck Carmel in the chest, and he instantly lost consciousness, falling backward and sprawling face down on the ground, motionless. Lissa raised her foot and stomped hard on Carmel's body, then strode quickly into the house. She soon saw a large cage. Inside the cage was the spirit cat, which, upon seeing the two of them, immediately bared its sharp teeth and hissed incessantly. Lissa circled the cage, raising her arm, which was wrapped in bandages, the bite wound still throbbing. I didn't expect you, you beast, to be able to sense that something was wrong with me, forcing our plans to be rushed forward. You're lucky you won't die, but you're also unlucky. I'll take you away, and torture you slowly. The spirit cat lunged forward, the cage shaking and scraping against the ground, the chains clanging loudly. Lissa's lips curled into a cruel, cold laugh as she spoke in a venomous, sweet tone. You should have bitten me to death back then. Too bad, that boy saved me. Speaking of which, he's really young and handsome, probably hasn't been deflowered yet. Lissa chuckled. What a pity, there wasn't enough time, otherwise I would have taken him too. Let him taste my myriad methods. Hurry up, stop being so lewd. Chira took a pocket watch from her pocket and said, We're leaving. Sally raised her wand, aimed it at the cage, and a beam of red light shot out from the side, sending her flying backward and crashing heavily to the ground. Who? Chira shouted. You can take me now too. Rolf's figure appeared. He chuckled. I'm right here, madam. Whatever my myriad methods you have, come at me. I'll take them all. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.